Jacob was not actually live streaming on the Sabbath. That was me being funny. Hoping that somebody would come on looking to argue, I guess. I don't know. I guess that's the appeal when Jacob's hosting. But I'm here, and anybody can come talk to me, and I will listen to whatever you have to say, because that's usually what I do before I start arguing with people. So please, someone come on, or whatever. I'm going to try to be here for like 3 hours. I have not much else to do tonight, so there we go. Much else to do tonight. So hello.
Hey, Michael.
How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
Pretty good. Yeah, just
Hey, Michael.
enjoying. How are you?
I'm okay.
Is your YouTube still on, or?
Yeah, I just closed it.
Okay, cool.
Have you started planning Christmas and stuff?
No, I don't. My wife takes care of most of that stuff. I have to think about something to get her, and then she buys gifts for everybody else. So,
Okay. Do you buy gifts for her?
Usually, yeah.
Okay.
Something.
I mean, have you done it yet?
No, I am a last minute shopper.
Dude, can
What
I
about you?
brag a little bit? Yes,
Yeah.
actually. This is the whole reason I was doing this. Okay, cool. Great. So I have money this year, which I usually don't. I'm a kind of poor person. But I got gifts for my wife with this cute backpack I got for her. And I got And this is some makeup from my grandma, but she likes it. So, and this is a little panda wallet. Yes. So I'm so happy.
Nice.
I'm so glad I can have stuff for my wife. And I should be able to send it to her. It'd be really nice.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm I there was something that I was like, oh, that would be a good gift, and then I forgot what it was. Because usually I'm not like that's like her love language is buying gifts for people and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I just I don't know. Everybody just buys what they want for themselves most of the time. So that's why it's hard for me to buy gifts for like my parents and stuff like that, because that's like they just buy whatever they want. So it's just symbolic. So
well, yeah. Well, it's interesting because like I think ideally what would happen, right, is, and unfortunately I'm not this kind of person. Like my wife is this way. She's very thoughtful. So I think what my wife would do if I don't know, would be like she would go and like she would like look at stuff sometimes, right, with her eyes, and then she would see stuff and she'd think about other people, right, and then she'd go get it for her. And this is like doesn't happen very often, but make hay with La Senza. And I saw that and I'm like, yes, this is perfect. And so I got it, and I'm like, yeah. Very
cool. Yeah, usually I try to make something too, because that way I feel like at least it's not. Then it is like it's meaningful, because it's not just about like, here I took money out of our joint checking account and bought something that you may or may not have picked out for yourself. So I usually try is to make something.
Oh, cool.
What
do you make?
Yeah. Well, I do woodworking, so I've made her like little boxes a couple times, and then I actually made her some like some earrings out of wood that were kind of cool. So
that's nice. I wish I was handier like that. That sounds really neat.
Yeah, it's fun. It's it doesn't. I mean, I think stuff doesn't have to be perfect either, but like they say, it's the thought that counts. But that's something, at least to me, I feel like, well, I just feel like, I don't know. I feel weird just with like buying stuff that's like regular. If it is something like really special, I think then that makes it like like something like that, where it's like that's very unique, and so that like they're gonna love it. But just like when you have the obligation of gift giving, it kind of is like stressful to me.
Okay.
But
so like when you when you think about stuff to make for your wife, right? So you're a woodworker. What does this mean exactly? Are you like a carpenter? Are you like more of a whittler, or how does this work?
So I am a carpenter, I guess you'd say. I work for a cabinet company full time. So
Okay,
that's what I do.
cool.
I fix cabinets in all the new homes, like the warranty on any new home, I fix the cabinets for.
Oh,
So,
wow.
and
Yeah, you
I've
could do like
used,
a serious Christmas present. You could like change all the cabinets in the kitchen and everything. That would be nuts.
yeah,
That's like
yeah. Well, it's a little tough for Christmas. I mean, yeah. So one thing I am for Christmas going to make bunk beds for my daughters. So
oh, that's so
that
sweet.
is, yeah. So um, I don't think they're going to be watching this, so I can say that, because
Yeah.
they're,
Well,
yeah. But yeah. It's I kind of saw that's like learned a lot of that stuff from my dad, and it was always like if money was tight and stuff, but you could find stuff and make something, and it is it's to me it's like more it's more personal because it's like I'm giving you the gift of like not just this thing, but like this is the time and the effort that I put into it. Usually that's a little bit last minute too, though. Just because I'm not a very
yeah,
organized person.
yeah. Well, like I said, to me, like it seems like it is about being thoughtful, and
Yeah.
that's what I always feel about like kind of ashamed of when I don't have something. It's not like, oh, I didn't like, I don't have all this money or whatever. It's like, or like something like that. But it's like, oh, how can I not think about you? Right? I'm supposed to think about you. I'm supposed to think about you all the time. You're my wife, or you're
Yeah.
my family, right? And like I depend on you and you depend on me, and we love each other, and we should be thinking about each other all the time. And that's what gets to me, right? Because I just think I see like how thoughtful my wife is, and how thoughtful like I'm a little bit like thoughtless, kind of careless, and I shouldn't
Hmm.
be that way. I should be better than that.
Yeah. Yeah. It is important. I just, yeah, I guess probably the ideal thing would be to give gifts more spontaneously, like not only at the prescribed times,
Mhm.
like, um, and then it's funny because so when we got married, my wife has like a ton of girlfriends that she exchanges gifts with, and she's like, "Oh, we always give each other Christmas gifts." I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's great." Um, but now it's like, so we've combined all our finances, and you buy them gifts, and they buy you gifts, and I get nothing. So that was my only complaint with her with that thing. But you
um,
know,
yeah,
it's okay. I do also like every once in a while, especially if it's around the holidays, if I can find some little opportunities to make like a little money that's outside of the regular paycheck, so she doesn't know about it. Then it's then I like it more because it's just lame. Because actually, this happened one time because like I was trying to do something and I like pull up the thing. I'm like, "What is this charge on our credit card?" And she's like, "You weren't supposed to see that. It's a Christmas gift." I'm like, why did you like okay, thank you. But like so that takes a little bit of the surprise out of it if your finances are joined together.
yeah. I do give like basically all my money to my wife, and the thing about it though is like I'm trying to think. So like part of it is like that I gave the money to her, and I was like, first of all, you have to keep track of the money because you're now responsible for it, right? Because if I didn't do this, right, my concern was that like we would jointly own the money, but then like we'd always be fighting about it, right? Because now like you're trying to like figure out how our money works is still like a hard problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're even like grasping that. No, this is my problem. You shouldn't have to worry about it. I'm like, no, it's our problem. We're married, right? But so but like part of it is like that a lot of that happened. Like I gave it to her in faith that she'd be responsible for it. And then she became like wiser and more responsible for it. And now like there's like guilt about like buying stuff, right? Because we have finances, we have debt, right? And so we're trying to like handle all that. And And so like to get something for her is now like more of a treat that couldn't happen otherwise, right? It's like I by me getting her a gift, now she has permission to have the gift, right? Which is a little bit weird, but it kind of is that whole it's almost like it reversed itself, right? Now she has I have the opportunity to give her something, right? I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's kind of how it worked out.
Yeah, it is a little tricky. That's the thing too, because like sometimes if she buys something, like she'll be like, I just really wanted this and I splurged, and I'm like, okay, like, well, that what it's like, I guess it wasn't necessarily budgeted for, but it's not a big deal. And then she'll be like, it's okay, you can buy something too. I'm like, no, that's not how joint checking works. Like, if you spend the money and I spend the money, then that messes stuff up. So it's like, it's okay, don't worry about it. But but yeah, it is a little tough. It's like she's not crazy about having to like take care of budgeting stuff, but like by necessity, she does most of the like shopping and things. So, but we have our stuff split up. So we have like one bank account that's like all the money for bills goes to this bank account, and then we have another bank account that's like the spending money. So in that regard, it's more or less just check the balance, and if there is money, you can spend it, and if there isn't money, you can't spend it. So.
Okay.
That's made it.
And you like have like regular savings and stuff.
Yeah.
Right. I assume. Yeah. Yeah. We're still like trying to handle the debt. Like if it was up to me, we'd be like paying down debt all the time, and we'd like live in a cardboard box or something. But that's not how it goes. So.
Yeah. We're managing that stuff. It is frustrating, but fortunately it's not. It's not tons. Do you guys have like student loans you're working off, or?
So she's my wife is Filipina, and so she's got like all these obligations to her family. So like she went and like she ends up paying for like her family's car, and she ends up paying for her family's house, and she ends up having like she does have some medical debt. But that's like mostly the stuff is like stuff for her family that like I'm married to her, and so I'm married to her family, and so I'm obligated to this stuff too. And I just want her to get out from under it so like she can be, free and we can build a life together,
Yeah. Medical stuff's pain. That's like the thing where I figured out like if it wasn't for that, like we pretty much wouldn't have any debt. But just the way like health care has changed. So we have like a high deductible we have to meet every year before like the coverage actually does anything useful. And so in the span of having 2 kids, and then just with the amount that kids get sick all the time, it's like every year we're the idea is like, okay, well, don't spend a lot on and stay healthy, and then it doesn't cost you a ton. But it's like the first $5,000 you have to pay out of pocket every year. So that's what happens.
Okay.
So
all right.
Yeah. But eventually we'll get a little more handle on that. So that's basically just like, oh, well, we get our tax return, and then it just goes to that every year. So,
okay.
Yeah. So I know you've been on these streams many times and been on Jacob's Discord for a long time and stuff. So how did you come to be in this situation?
Oh God. So I was trying to memorize the Bible, and so I ended up getting a hold of like some Christian like YouTube stuff when I like never did, and then eventually I ended up with looking at some Mike Winger stuff. It was like okay, and then like despite what Jacob says, he's okay. It's not that bad. And then like going from Mike Winger, I went from like I looked at some Malone stuff, and Malone like does like apologetics. He does like street apologetics, and so like you have Mike Winger doing like these more like do what about women in the church stuff, and then like you have like Malone doing like this cult is like seriously bad, right? And then Malone had Jacob on, and they were talking about the Black Hebrew Israelites, right? Which Jacob like never talks about anymore, right? And and so sometimes I wonder about this, like, did he just talk about the Black Hebrew? Because like because like Jacob does talk about this sometimes, like somehow there's like a flow to like what has been going on in his life. There's a way things are going, and it doesn't seem like it's just chance. It seems like things are lining up in a certain direction on a certain path, right? And that's how it feels. Like, did Jacob talk about the Black Hughes Israelites just so like I could get here? Was that the point, right? And maybe, I don't know, but that's how I got here. And he talked like, oh yeah, I'm going to teach. I'm all about teaching people Hebrew. And then later on, I had this idea for how to teach people Hebrew, and I do actually want to get that done. I had a whole idea for a website and everything. I worked on it for a little while, and then I got busy with other stuff. But I kind of want to do that. It sounds really interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. So I didn't realize that was when he came in, because I do remember that. I know because he was having that feud with that one guy, Zion Lex, and then I guess after that tapered off. It didn't really.
Like I came right as that was stopping, like right.
Yeah.
And I appeared, and then all that was gone.
Well, I think it's interesting because it's like that is kind of a funny thing about not just Jacob's channel, but like most of the people connected to him, is that like prior to me kind of getting around this corner, as they call it, I had thought about starting a YouTube channel, actually for like woodworking stuff. And it seems like the way that everybody does it is like you have to be like really focused and like on brand and be like, this is what my channel's about. And then people would kind of like have, it's like they had a certain amount of ideas that they had stored up before they launch. And then after a while, it just kind of loses steam, but you're locked into a brand and your audience is all there for that sort of thing. And if you want to do different stuff, you're gonna like lose people's interest or whatever. So yeah, it's like everybody connected to Jacob and this thing is super like attention deficit disorder when it comes to like staying on a particular topic, but it's all kind of related topics, I guess. So
yeah. So what was the idea behind the just chatting streams? Like, I know in theory we're supposed to talk, but if Jacob's whole thing is Judaism, like I know more than zero, but not enough to run a show about Judaism at all. So I don't know what his idea was for the 24-hour stream.
Well, I think he would say, well, his number one thing is this idea about securing our distributed cognition. So that I think is his more overarching goal. So it's just about like getting people connected and talking to each other, and he's probably about the most argumentative person amongst everybody that comes on here. But I mean, for the most part, I think that there have been more like genuine conversations with people like sharing what their differences are, rather than just like the traditional like gunslinging apologetics debate argument kind of stuff. So I mean, yeah. So I mean, he always tells me that my theology is the worst and all that, but
so why is your theology so bad?
Because I'm a Protestant and pretty much Calvinist. So hello.
Hey, how are you guys?
Good. Fun?
Not too bad. Thunderstorms happening down in the southern half of the hemisphere, but it's been good. Yeah, just got time to do some chores and do some practice. But I don't know, like, yeah, just wanted to try to be on things as much as possible and be part of the discussion and stuff. What were you guys talking about?
Oh, we're just kind of getting to know each other a little bit. Just how we kind of got connected to this what the point of the chatting is as it approaches 24 hours a day, which still a long ways off from that, but
oh yeah,
definitely picking up. So,
and there needs to be another person on my side of the hemisphere coming out. It would be really cool if we matched up on some things sometimes. What do you think is missing in this little corner? Because I actually have some theories on it. Or like, what do you think is like the next step? Because I think like a lot of people are worried that we're going to become Rebel Wisdom or this weird IDW, or sort of like a failing, like a dim echo of what we were before, because people lose commitments, or people's commitments, then things change and stuff like that. What are your thoughts?
I think that just new people just need to come on and like start and just we have to figure out how to like not like make like when I first came on here, it's like I got to talk to Paul Vanderklay on his channel, and he's like 20,000 subs, so he's like the big guy, but then there were still some people who were like having 100, 200, 300 subscribers. So if I started commenting on their videos and stuff, like it was like, hey, we're like sort of in the same boat here. So it's like, it's kind of funny because it's like I think there was like who the central characters were in this little corner may have been a little different a couple of years ago, and then it's like there's like a new crop that comes up. So I think we just need to kind of keep having that happen, keep having like new crops of people, and just to me it's just like there's no rules, there's no like penalty for saying something stupid. It doesn't cost any money to be on YouTube. So just go, come on, say stuff. Maybe people will make fun of you. Jacob probably will. And then I'm finally getting in on Jacob and trying to see a couple of the videos of him. He a very interesting new member, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a little. He's definitely, everybody who's a Christian, he's definitely got a different view, take on any conclusions that we come to about things when we're reading the Bible. So, but honestly, I mean, it's like that's okay. Like, I mean, I'm glad for for if he challenges me on things, and sometimes it's while we're talking and I don't really have a good answer, but then, it gives me something to look up and figure out, like, why do I believe what I believe, or why does my church believe what they.
Yeah. Like there's something that like he's been doing to me, which I've really enjoyed, which is, I don't know, like I think about how sort of I got into this place because, everyone kind of talks about the similar. We all had the Jordan Peterson sort of pipeline into Paul Vanderklay.
Yeah.
But the really interesting thing was, like Peterson's been talking about the same stuff for a long time, but the first change that he had in me wasn't spiritual, it was political.
Mm-hmm.
And it was political in the sense of it made me understand. It made me want to understand myself and the world a lot better so that I could make it better, as opposed to simply trying to use my understanding of the world as I see it to make the world better. And so, like, and I mean, I assume it's the same for a religious sort of set of beliefs or paradigm or structure, but that shattered me. Like, changing my political views is still taking a lot of thinking, and it's kind of put me into this space that I didn't really understand. And then because I was in this place that I didn't really understand, I began to realize the importance of religion. I began to sort of see the ways that I underestimated, or the ways in which I forgot Christianity filled holes where I thought there were some in the world. Because I went to a Lutheran school, and I had a sort of, it was like nominally Christian in the sense that like you hear about the stories, but like I never went to church. My family never said grace or anything like that. But the thing that was really interesting that, I don't know, I was thinking about this for a while, because Jordan Peterson he did these two things. He talked about how attention isn't arbitrary. What you pay attention to informs and shapes your being, and that matters. And so that's sort of where I started realizing the political sort of corruption that I had in my life, where it was just feeding on my desires and feeding on my rage and impulses. And so I was like, okay, so I need to start to expand my horizons. And then, it comes into this point where you realize that you are not just a human being with desires that requires a difficult time to think. You actually also have a yearning for community and communitas. And I think that that requirement has this sort of yearning for a religious revelation. Like for a long time, listening to Paul van der Klee, like in a similar way to Peugeot, it's not about what he was saying, it's about how he was saying it and why he was saying it, and like that sense, that pastoral sort of unconditional love or experience, that sort of gifting of some knowledge that you can take or leave, but is for you, and you are part of it and stuff like that. And that's sort of like to make a long story longer. That's when I started going, okay, so this is actually, there is a spiritual aspect to being that is ontologically necessary for proper functioning in the world, as at least I see it. But so what I see, and so what I saw, that's when I started looking for a church and started going to a church and reading and sort of going back to a certain amount of faith. But the thing that I realized that is really the spot that Peterson, the spot that Paul and Pageau sort of make, is a place where you're allowed to believe and doubt at the same time, and a place where you're allowed to play with faith.
Yeah.
And that's always been something that I think religious, especially people who, especially like either like newly passionate religious people or lifelong religious people sort of have a problem, not a problem with, struggle with would be the better word. It's like to try and play with the sacred is very, very sensitive for a lot of people. And that's what I see with what Jacob is saying about Paul. I think I don't quite understand what he's saying still, aside from the fact that like I don't know, people are like, non-Christians are idiots, but in a non-serious way. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because that's like saying like Paul van der Klee's like theological kind of leanings and his way of doing things, to me, is like the perfect way. It's risky because it's like messy and there isn't a lot of like clear lines, and it's hard to figure out, like it's like because they do these like polls and stuff to find out like how many people are attending church and like they'll ask them like questions about like their beliefs to try to like gauge like where, what the state of faith is. And like, if that's something you're trying to figure out, like this kind of what's going on in this corner is kind of be frustrating. But I think I think I think that what you lose by it being nebulous and undefined, you gain in the fact that just there's people that will never approach those other things. There's no way they're ever going to get there some other way. So like, and I think, you kind of hit it on the head with this thing of, it's this thing of having faith and doubt, and it's okay to have both,
Yeah.
Because even I would say, that's why, like, I didn't come from a very strict church background, but then there was even still like, you don't necessarily have the freedom to like start from the ground up and figure out like, how does this work? Like, how does God work in the world? And like, within the four walls, you might push some buttons if you're asking questions the wrong way. But
like the strangest thing is I was shocked a year ago by the thought that the main difference between Christianity and other religions is Christ. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's a strange thing to be shocked by. It's like, oh, of course that's the main difference, but it's just like, what's the main difference? And learning about and trying to understand what it is that the Messiah was and what that means, which it's still a lot for me. But like, that's something that I don't think I would have been able to be shocked by if I grew up in the church.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those propositions that it wouldn't have made sense almost. I don't know quite how to say it.
I mean, I would say I grew up in the church, and it meant one thing when I was a kid, and it's meant continuously deeper things at various points in my life. So, I mean, I don't think you ever really get to the bottom of those stories, and especially the point of it is not to keep it in the four walls. You have to figure out how this stuff relates to your life, and it relates to every part of your life in some way. And so then the more you realize that, the more meaningful and it becomes.
One of my favorite spiritual thoughts is this guy who is not spiritual. He was talking about how beliefs don't matter. And I was just like, well, then what does? And he just looked at me and said, every single breath you take. And I was like, well, that just everything comes back then. It's just crazy. I feel like I've been talking too much. What do you guys? What is on your mind about this stuff?
Well, to me, it's not necessarily clear what we're supposed to do, right? So, like, I did have this idea to build like the Hebrew thing, and I even had Gavin was helping with it for a little while, and hopefully I can get started back working on it. But like, to me, like, okay, cool, we're hanging out, we like this Paul guy. Okay, he seems to be like have a very empathetic take on the Bible, and that's always nice to hear. And you've got Jacob, who knows a lot from being a rabbi. And then we've got a couple other people like that, like Chezi and people like that. But that's all nice. It's nice to have people like that who are smart, who are telling us smart stuff. That's nice. But what are you supposed to do? We're supposed to like absorb this information. And then what? What kind of lives are we supposed to live? Does this change how we live? Does this change what we do? Does this give us new goals into like how to live our lives for till we die? What's going on? You know?
Well, I think it does. I mean, I kind of got on this thing with like not knowing like what's this going to lead to, and I am working on a plan now to like implement some of this stuff in like a real life way. I mean, I already do try to like, like I was saying, like. I try to bring this stuff like into my work and into my time with my family and stuff like that. But I think, we're made in the image of God, and God's first way that he reveals himself is as a creator. And so that aspect of his nature is kind of like one of the most central things about what it means for us to be made in God's image. So we do have to do something, which I don't think it could. I think that the some of the problem with making like certain types of things too sacred is then it doesn't leave a space for like the regular person. But I feel like, everything that you do, like your plan with your Hebrew thing, like that is something that's like God's giving you an inspiration to do. And sometimes those sort of inspirations aren't necessarily about the thing. Like when I was graduated high school, me and my Christian friends thought we were gonna like start a Christian rock band, and that would be like the way that we would change the world. And that lasted like one summer. But it helped like, but it's like, it's weird. It's like, I felt like, cause I was like working at a internship out of state, and I was thinking about going back. And then I was like, no, I think maybe this is what God wants me to do. So I moved home. That didn't work out, but like that was the way that God like got me to go back. Kind of like how what you were saying about how Jacob's weird feud with Zion Lex got him to connect with Vocab, and that's what got you here. So, I mean, I kind of think, God's just playing like the most complex game of little whispers here and there that ultimately changed like the course of history in the world.
Well,
so
I mean, that's true. So like that's good even, right? So like, okay, things are evolving, right? We're gonna have to use our brains to like come up with the next challenge or whatever. That's good. But in the meantime, right? Like we've got we're also supposed to be engaging with what's now. And what's now is what? And that seems to be the question. And yeah.
So yeah, like I agree. I think what's now, like my thought as to what comes next is developing skills as a actual practice in hospitality. And this is like the sort of this is how I sort of approach this idea. Like we've been learning how to play with ideas really well. I think a lot of people have like done really cool things. Luke Thompson's piece of shit theology video was kind of like one of the biggest ones for me. But one of the things that I think it's like a Grim Grizz thing of learning embodiment is a practice that I think we all agree with, but we don't know what to do, because embodiment in a religious setting, that's denominational almost. Like the embodiment is kind of where the separates what separates Catholic from Lutheran and all of that type of stuff. it's like what it's like literally the physical buildings you go to, the methods of prayer, and all of those things. But hospitality is a place where there's enough wiggle room, in the sense that it's about welcoming in, but there is a particularity in it, and the particularity isn't the belief, it isn't the conversation, it isn't anything, it is what you are offering, which in a hospitality setting is normally food or drink. And so that's something that I think about sort of offering to people, because like I gain a lot from this book called The Book of Tea by Okakura Kakuzo. And it's a place in which they get to truly practice an art that is engaged in sort of the gentle ways of conversation, of nature and appreciation. I come from a hospitality background, and the ways in which it sort of the ways in which it has informed me is in the appreciation of doing things for others in a particular way. So like that's like, I don't know, I think that is one of the things that I think is really interesting to learn to understand and to learn to offer, is a way in which we can embody the practice of hospitality to each other, because we can, come into each other's living rooms and talk for a little bit. But what else can we do? How else can we sort of bring those practices in? What do you guys think about that?
I think you're right. I mean, I think, like Paul is an excellent pastor. And when I say that, it's not like what makes him a pastor is like, it's not that he works in a church and he preaches sermons or whatever. Like, that's what he gets paid for, more or less. But, and this you could even say, like, this is the distinction between a priest and a pastor. The priest's like central duty is performing the acts of worship, but pastor is a word that means a shepherd. A shepherd takes care of his flock. He takes care of the sheep, which is the people that come to him. And so I say, like, Pastor Paul is a great example of a pastor, because he's making himself available for randos to just come on and talk. He's making them feel heard. He's not trying to solve their problems. He's letting them work out their stuff. And then, the way he deals with the homeless people that are all around his church, and like, he gives them a firm hand because that's a little bit of what they need, but he obviously cares about them. He's getting to know them. He's becoming friends with them, trying to encourage them to do better as much as they can. But like, he treats them like real people, which almost nobody does towards the homeless. And then, like, even when he does like the Freddie and Paul show, like, that's like, not a lot of people would there's a lot of pastors or people who would say like, oh, I'm too busy to do something like that. It's a weird niche thing. It's not like, it doesn't seem like the point of it is not necessarily the content that it produces, but it's like, it's showing us an example of like how you should treat others. And so I think that's the thing that we can emulate. I mean, that's even like a thing that I've kind of had to think about, like, because I remember there's a couple times where I was at my work and I had to train some people, and for the most part I work by myself, and I like working by myself. I get to listen to all the videos and stuff, but like I had somebody with me every day for several weeks, and it's like, this is annoying. But then, after a while, I realized like, oh, this is a good opportunity for me to like help this person be heard and understood, and it it didn't necessarily have to be about having a super meaningful or spiritual discussion, but it was just about the way that I treat somebody in that position, and like so I think that's the kind of the thing, as where's my mouse? Put the no, my mouse is not working right. Mark is saying, no, we lost intimacy, which means we cannot participate properly, and service is what comes to mind. I think he's right. So like, how do you gain intimacy with people? You have to, like, to a certain extent, get, at least make some avenue for vulnerability, for common, seeing them as a real human, So I think that's kind of the thing, is if the more we do that, just in all the little interactions we have, the better.
Have you guys read the Peugeot book?
I read
Probably not. Which
I
Peugeot?
read I read half of it. It's not the right book for me. I can tell. Like, the only thing that really bothered me about it was he's assuming that the person reading it like is a materialist, reductionist thinker, which I'm not. Like, I already view the world in a very enchanted way, but just differently than the Peugeot brothers. So I respect what they're trying to do, but
well, one of the things that like he said very early on, was the role of Adam and the role of man is to name the animals and may be a host for the angels, and what that sort of talks to me about, like, in regards to the context of hospitality, it's the very similar thing that it is about this idea of opening yourself up to do things in accordance with another, which in this context, another that you deem higher than yourself, that you deem cannot exist without your participation. So, for example, like, to put this in a hospitality context, if I wanted to make a good cocktail for you, the idea would be that you are letting go of some of your presuppositions as to your taste, and going, I'm giving my taste to the bartender, because the bartender understands drinks more, or whatever reason that they have. But within that, then you get to sit and you get to have this place. And then because of that, an interaction can happen. You gain trust, especially if you're given something that you didn't expect, but it was enriching. And you gain from, in sort of the roughest word I could say, you gain from surrendering an agency. Like, instead of choosing the drink yourself, the drink is chosen for you. So that was one of the things that those, like, so, I think I can agree with you in, like, the sense that I like the Peugeots, just like, especially Matthew, he's very, very simple in his ideation. And so the way that, and which I don't mind though, because I get to flesh out his ideas myself as opposed to him for me. But that's something that I think within hospitality, like what you did with your friend, your colleague, it's not about doing something, but it's about making a space in which you can offer them to be enriched within a certain context by, like, providing them a space to put themselves into, and then letting themselves be vulnerable in a way that they normally wouldn't.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like I know like the hospitality part I think is actually really important. And it's something that I think stems into my sort of fascination with ritual. But I think like to me that appears to be sort of the one thing that that a good focus should be had within this little corner. I don't know, maybe it's because I don't know how to have a good conversation all the time, so I can't be trusted with the to not ramble on for hours or derail the topic or something like that. I need a bit more structure, but structure in the service of, I don't know, the modes of hospitality. That's something I think would help, if anything.
Let's see what Mark says. You can afford that, but they have to agree, submit to being helped. You'd be surprised how many people won't accept outside hospitality, even when they want to engage. That is true. That is true. And that's even something where I would say that we can model. It's like Jesus said, it's better to give than to receive, which we can understand, like that I'm gaining the more benefit. But sometimes it's difficult to receive things graciously. And that's probably a skill that we don't practice as much, and I think a lot of times people don't like to receive hospitality and kindness from others because they feel like they're incurring a debt. But if somebody is genuinely offering something, like rejecting that, I'm not saying rejecting it, like you're not shoving it in their face, but just turning it down, even you're doing it politely, it is a little bit of like an insult. And so,
think about it in terms of like how art used to actually demand a certain level of behavior from people. Like at the very least, like you had to dress up nice. You had to present yourself in a good way to say like you're going to the gallery or you're going to the symphony or something like that, like a public music event. Like there were demands on you that, you should dress this way. You have to be quiet. There are norms and principles that are required of you. And I think that on top of that, furthermore, like to actually really appreciate classical music, you kind of have to be informed in the modes of like, what a requiem is, what a concerto is, like what the piece was, what this symphony does differently. Like the more you understand, the more you sort of you give yourself to this discipline, the more value a symphony is. Like, I think that's like what postmodernism kind of broke, because it required almost so much work from the audience that people were just like, this is just ridiculous, guys. Like Philip Glass's 444, where it's like dead silence, but he wrote in the audience shuffling, the ticking of a metronome, the coins jangling into a cage, and he was just like, this is the sound of silence. And we're like, this is too many rules. This is too much of a requirement of me to appreciate. Whereas, and so like, I think that's where the dance comes in, because like my friend has a very, very beautiful bar in my town. And one of the things that it really does is it really instills a decorum by being like very like isolated. It's only 12 seats allowed in the bar, so only 12 people at a time, and it's quiet, so demands silence. He's very intentional and deliberate. He'll never rush, and that creates a mode, that creates a place naturally doing something like this, like within this little corner, I think is an interesting thing to do, because I think we've seen different modes of hospitality within internet culture as a whole. Because there's the whole mukbang thing where people are eating online, and then there's different stream parties that were tried over COVID and all that type of stuff. But but I think the best things that have come close within hospitality, that we can do it within us, is, well, we're slowly doing it. Like, we're understanding that, at least for me, that I'm understanding that this little corner requires participation. It requires at least, jumping onto someone's live stream and jumping onto places to talk and actually voice, if not reflect, what you have found was interesting or anything like that. But it does require you to speak. And I think it's always been working towards that. It's been hard because a lot of it gets confused with, you have to speak. This has to become your job. You have to invest in this for this to be like, this is your time, this is your thinking and stuff like that. But that's like to me, that's like the first sign of like hospitality being a more prescient, I don't know if that's the right word, prescient thing in this mode, in this evolution. That participation, at the very least, in conversation and dialogue, like with you two guys, that's important. And I think then, there was something in me that was like, Paul felt like the gatekeeper of the little corner, where it's like, you can't participate until you've spoken to Paul. Not that that's true. I still haven't talked to him. It's been like 10 months. I haven't managed to find a free spot, but so like that was like an almost unspoken rule that I think might need to change with, I don't know, some of the lieutenants, like Grim Grizz or you, or like Job was doing it for a while, I remember. But sort of like a communal spot in which we all like present ourselves and we all participate, and then a space in which we can explore each other's independent participations. And then I'm sure there'll be something similar that comes up. Like the first thought that comes to mind would be, if we were like an email chain or a forum, the next.
Oh no, we lost your
or something like that.
sound.
So like there'd be a
Yeah, we can hear your
place
sound.
to work towards.
Well, Mark said, I'd argue dressing up is a ritual. The idea of demands is spot on. We aren't demanding anymore. We let subjective experience rule the
Yeah.
roost.
Yeah, which is
So,
why I think
like-
that there's that Grim Grizz. Oh, sorry, I'm just responding to Mark directly. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Cool. That's why I would just respond to Mark directly. Grim Grizz really, really opened the floodgates for me on that, because he was just like, this is a playground. This isn't a town square. This isn't a public address. This is a gym. This is a video game. This is something that you can voluntarily pick up. I'm shutting down. I gotta go, guys. Bye.
All right. Good to have you here.
See ya.
It was nice talking to you. So like when people talk about art, what do they mean? Like I do draw, I do paint. I get the impression no one really respects me as an artist. That's okay. But like when I think about people who are really like the masters of art now, I think like, oh yeah, the fountain was really beautiful, or like The Lord of the Rings is an amazing piece of art, or like I don't know, Hayao Miyazaki is like really old now, but he made amazing art through his studio, right? And those seem like the big pieces of art, like we make a Sistine Chapel, like at least once every 3 years through these like amazing movies, made by mature directors. And like, that's serious art, and it requires like you to engage, right? It requires you to think very hard about the movie, or even like one of these prestige TV shows, right? You have to like remember like 30 hours of like a TV show to like keep up with what's going on. That's a real demand. So I don't know like why people like are so down on like modern art. It seems like we actually make a lot of really good art.
Well, I mean, I think I probably agree with you because I think that there is this sort of like anachronistic problem that happens with like old stuff where like the Sistine Chapel, it's been around for hundreds of years. So we've had that example of like the pinnacle for such a long time, and everybody's still going and looking at it. And to be fair, like that was a huge undertaking even in that day. But I think that it's tough for us to understand. Like, we're looking at the stuff that's happening now and we're saying this isn't real art, it's just like pop culture or something. And then we look at the past and say like, now that's real art, like cathedrals and stuff like that. But then I was like thinking, I'm like, okay, so if you look in a cathedral, there's like all these stained glass windows and they have like pictures that are portraying like all the stories from the Bible. Yes, they are beautiful, but I think part of the reason they did that is because in an illiterate culture, that was a very necessary thing just to convey these ideas to people. That is and same thing with all the religious art. It is designed to convey the message. And it wasn't until the Protestant Reformation when literacy and books were widely available. So we've only had books available for like 500 years and the ability to read them for, probably not much longer than that. So up until that time, that was the way. And in some ways, it's still the way, movies and stuff are a huge, huge deal. So Mark will correct us of our errors now. So, but I mean, I think there's no doubt that like in 100 years or something, like people will look at the Lord of the Rings movies or even like the Marvel, the MCU with this huge overarching like thing. People will look at that in a very different way than the way that we're looking at it now, I think. What do you think?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me okay? I don't use this. Okay. Yep. I got my Chromebook going here because my laptop's busy. I think the problem with art is that art is an expression of beauty, and beauty is not definable by propositions. And if you're in the material world and you're stuck as a materialist, you're trying to define everything in terms of propositions. And I like what Peugeot says, is modern art's garbage because it doesn't point at the highest. That doesn't mean all of it, right? Because a broken clock's right twice a day. So you can say, oh, look, the Lord of the Rings is a beautiful piece of art. Sure. Is it on the order of a Sistine Chapel? Not even close. Like, there's no depth there. It's literally a 2D image.
Depth of the Lord of the Rings? That is.
Yeah, it's literally a 2D image. Like, I mean, technically, there's no depth. There's no z-axis. It doesn't exist. Right. So you can talk about depth of story.
In what?
Right.
So like when I look into a picture, you get the 3-dimensional and the 2-dimensional, right? That's what Trump
for some pictures you kind of can, but it doesn't have depth. Like definitionally, it technically doesn't have a z-axis. There's just no depth in a painting.
So in a painting. So first of all, again, that's the whole idea of Trump Lloyd is to get that z-axis. And I think it does a pretty good job. People have been working pretty hard at this for hundreds of years. In Lord of the Rings, you get a w-axis, right, through time, which is really amazing.
Everything has a time axis. So it has less dimensionality than real things in the real world.
Has a time axis. That does not seem fair.
But no, look. Even a painting that looks 3-dimensional, you can't walk through it and experience the third dimension. It's not there. It's not there to be experienced.
And so like you can walk through a cathedral.
You can walk through the Sistine Chapel, but
yeah, so that is possible. to walk through Sistine Chapel. But like, how many people can go to the Sistine Chapel, right? And it's like, well, as many people can fit, and they try very hard to fit a lot of people in, and it's actually kind of hard, right? And when people want to go visit the Sistine Chapel, right, and you go in, I've heard about like these tourists come in. There's actually like people that like cramp from wall to wall, like trying to get in and see it.
I've been there.
Right.
I've been there.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was, yeah, you kind of have to, you can't stay too long. You kind of have to
Yeah.
walk at a slow pace, and then you're one time through, and then that's it. But
Right. But now you're just saying, oh, it's not universal enough. Well fair enough. It's
Well,
not- maybe it's not
I'm-
supposed to be.
well,
Maybe we need more of those so we don't have only one. And we're not building them. We're busy making the Lord of the Rings. And look,
Well-
at a certain point, you run into resource contention.
Okay, so like, I'm trying to think about like, if I was gonna make my own Sistine Chapel, what would it be? And that's like because like, I mean, one guy who is a very well-honored artist, right, Michelangelo, painted the whole thing. He didn't make the whole thing. The chapel probably went up over like 100 years.
Well, right, but you
and
can
then,
see the
like-
trap you're already in, right? Do you see the
What?
trap you're in?
do you
If
mean
I
the
were
trap
to
I'm
do this, okay, you're never going to do anything like that ever. It's at a scale that one
well,
person
even
can't conceive of.
Michelangelo didn't do it, right? Like it was.
That's what,
thousands of
that's
people
that's my
probably
point.
who
No
built it
one
over 100
person.
years.
Yeah, but no one person did it. That's the whole
Correct.
point. Like,
Well,
but that's
the same thing
but
is true
that's
about the Lord
see,
of the
that's
Rings,
the
right? Like,
hubris
no
of
one
the
person
modern
made the Lord
mind.
of the Rings, right?
No, but that's the hubris
someone
of
had
the
to
modern
devise
mind.
it, right? But nonetheless, right, it was done over by thousands of people over a long period of time with lots of planning. Right.
No, look, get it simpler. What if I were to get together a group of people who could build something at that scale? Why don't you do
Yes,
that?
of course.
Like, why try to
Okay.
imagine it in your head? That's not possible anyway.
So if I had 1,000 people somehow,
You don't need 1,000 people. No. Get 5 people together who have some likelihood of being able to implement an actual building in the world, and do it. Right,
Okay.
because this is the problem of hospitality, right? This is the whole problem
Mhm.
of this corner of the internet, which I commented on Paul's video recently. I said, look, everybody says, well, I want to build something, and I want to build something, and I want to build something, and I reach out to all of them and I say, oh, come join us, we're building things, and you know what? None of them have. Zero, right? Because they want to build their thing their way, and they don't want to cooperate with other people. They either don't want to lead, which is a terrible burden, or they try to lead and they can't because not everybody can lead, or they don't want to be under a leader, which is fine. But like, you're not going to get anything done bigger than you if you're not going to cooperate with people, and you have to find one of those two modes of cooperation. And the more we sit back and get solipsistic and say, well, what would I do if I could build it? Nobody's built a cathedral by themselves or anything like, no one's even conceived of it. And we're not cooperating with other people. And when we don't do that, we get fanciful. And then we go, why no one's building cathedrals? Okay, no one person on this planet can ever possibly, no matter how smart they are, no matter how much IQ, understand why we're not building a cathedral. It's not possible for a single human brain to do that, to know something like that. This is just the modern hubris around, oh, well, we know what the ancients did and how they did it. No, we don't. We don't know how the pyramids were built. We know nothing. We're literally moronic. They didn't know how many of the cathedrals were built at all, right? They had no idea. One of the cathedrals has a big chain going around it because they had to fix the building after it was built. It took them forever to figure out what happened and how they did it. There's a great documentary on PBS about it. It's lovely, right? And that's part of the problem. We think our hubris is we think we're understanding these things because we have tiny amount of historical context.
Okay.
And then we're like, oh, I'm going to reimagine it myself. No, you're not.
Okay, I get it.
Why not? Why not? What if I want
Did you
to?
ever see Colors of the Earth? It's a
Which
show
story?
about someone how a cathedral got built. And what seemed to have happened was that there was a relic, and there was a sort of stone soup thing that happened, right? There was a skull of John the Baptist or somebody, right? And then people were like, "Oh man, we got to build something nice around this." And then there were several people who came together, like you said, like one person can't do it. And there was a particular builder and planner, but it was much more complicated than that, right? And that's how these things come together. And I wonder, maybe that's what we need. We need a stone soup to bring 5 people together to make something really good. But I don't know. What are you building? This is what I'm interested in. What are you building? What do you want to build?
Indeed.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, we've built practices on the Vervaeke server, right? We used some of Vervaeke's work because he was the head of that project, right? He was the de facto leader in some sense, right? So we built practices, right? We do daily meditation, we do book clubs, right? We're not doing any right now. We do watch parties, right? We're getting together and participating in distributed cognition because we realize that, you know, even just a book, you can read a book by yourself. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Are you going to understand it? If it's a deep book, no, you're not. I mean, that's what distributed cognition is for, right? Is to understand it. I mean, that's why they have Bible study, right? Like, and because books of a certain type, right? Like maybe the Republic, maybe the Bible, right? Maybe the Bhagavad Gita, right? Maybe any of the Eastern, you know, wisdom texts. Maybe they're just too full of knowledge for a single person to understand them reasonably with a single perspective, because you are always limited to one perspective. You can switch out of that perspective maybe sometimes, but you can't switch into any other random perspective. You don't have all the perspectives, and you can't hold them all at once, which means you're missing a bunch of flavors. And it is this individualistic, hubristic view of the world that we're falling prey to. And like, I was very disappointed when I heard Grim talking about, wow, we had 2 or 3 people involved in the Beholder project, but I was like, but what? 2 or 3 is great. That's more than 1. And why did it fall apart? Right? Those are the questions I ask. I don't, you know, who cares? Like, why do you think it needs more than 2 or 3 people? Like, and if 2 or 3 isn't enough, how many is enough? And how do you know? You know, and you've got to start small. Like, everybody wants to start big. You know, like Jacob, I love Jacob, but like, oh, we need a 24/7, you know. Okay, could you get something that happened on a regular basis every day once? Because that's the hard part. Right. Once you have that, building up to the 24/7 is easy. But if you can't do the hard part first, if you can't do, oh, I'm going to be here, or this content's going to be here every day at this time, you're not going to do the 24/7 thing. That can't happen. Right. It's like, I want to build the Sistine Chapel, but I don't know how to lay, you know, to do masonry. Well, then, you know, like, it's like, that's great. Do it in your head, but it's always going to stay in your head. You're never actually going to build it in the real world. And that's fine too. Like, look, people are welcome to their little imaginations, right? But when we get caught up in that, we're not participating in the real world.
True that.
So Trappa's here now. Do you want to add anything to the conversation?
I'm just lurking for now until I find the right spot to jump in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, I've said this multiple times, but in various places, but it's very interesting to me that when God speaks to the Israelites and says, I'm your God and I'm going to live with you now, the home that he has them built is not a temple, it's a tent. Because you need something to give you shelter while you work on the ultimate things.
Yeah.
And
he was a god on the move.
Yeah. But ultimately the point, I think we look at these things that exist and have been here for hundreds of years, and we say like, wow, look at the Sistine Chapel, it's amazing, there's nothing like it. But the really incredible thing is Michelangelo made the Sistine Chapel, but the Sistine Chapel also made Michelangelo. And that's like God that's what he makes people. And so, and he makes us in our image, and he is a creator. So we're designed to create. So yeah, we do have to make stuff. I mean, just get there and make something badly and get help to make things better. And yeah, I think, yeah, that is the way. We got to start where we're at with what we have, with who is available, and it's okay to build sucky garbage. That's the only way you learn how to make beautiful things. So
how long do you think we were making sucky garbage before we made cathedrals and stuff like that?
We're still doing it.
Thousands of years. Depends on
Well,
who you pay attention to.
I don't know. That's
but
why
I mean, there wasn't a cathedral. There weren't cathedrals to start with. We had to make sucky garbage for quite a long time. We still are, but
Yeah.
there had to be some type of time period before it all when we were just getting it all together. Unless you believe in ancient aliens.
No, I think this it's a cycle, and that's I think people don't like the cycle, right? They want, oh, we've progressed past that. No, we haven't progressed past anything ever, right? We progress, and then we lose everything, and then we progress, and then we lose everything. We do that in our lives at every scale. We do that in our cultures. We do that across time, and people don't like that message, but that's what's actually happening, and it's happening pretty. Like, look, we don't
We're all
know
just
how the
losers.
Egyptians built the pyramids. Technically, that technology has been lost to us, and we're still not dealing with that fact. Like, oh no, we have good theories about. We probably have a dozen theories about how they built the pyramids, but we don't know how they built the pyramids. We know several ways they might have built the pyramids, and they might all be wrong, right? And we're not. We keep thinking like we're much better than our ancestors because we were born later, and that's not true. We're still people, and we're still peopling all over the place. And we don't know, like I said, like there was a whole special on this. They could not figure out what was wrong with this cathedral and that it was fixed. And then they couldn't figure out how the hell they fixed it. And now they can't figure out how they knew how to fix it that way. And they discovered all these technologies that they didn't think existed back then.
Which cathedral was this?
Was repaired. They fixed it with a chain. They chained the top level of the cathedral together because there was a design flaw in it. That they didn't.
Which cathedral was this?
I don't remember at the top of my head. I'd have to look it up. There's a great PBS special on it. I just don't remember the name of it or anything.
So they made a large metal chain to hold it together structurally, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Crazy.
Not only that, they put the chain in hot. So they like banged the chain into the masonry hot and let the chain cool. So that when it cooled, it pulled the blocks together. And I was like, holy shit. Like, and they don't know how they did. Like, I don't believe they even know how they did that. They know that it happened, but they're not sort of clear on, well, what did they do? Did they move forges up into the third level of wherever it is of the huge building here? Like, what's the process?
It was probably just one person's idea. I mean, having worked on numerous job sites.
No, I don't see any evidence that the one genius hypothesis doesn't seem to hold up historically. Sometimes there's people with visions.
Well, sometimes if one person had the idea.
I mean, one person might have initially come up with it, but then okay,
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
The chain up there, how do they move the furnaces up there, right? How do they do all this? And this is like,
well, yeah, like
someone had to know how the furnace worked.
And how many times did they get that idea wrong?
5 people, like easily, who came up with
different.
But
how many times did how many times did the first person get it wrong? Like, how many times did the guy who came up with the ultimate right idea first say, "Oh, what we're going to do is use rope," and then
why are you yelling, Mark? Why are you yelling at us?
I'm not yelling, but how many times did they fail in their idea? Right, that's a better question because we keep casting this as like, oh well, some guy had a great idea.
A better question than what?
A better question.
A better question than what question?
Than whether or not and who came up with the first idea to fix it. Because there might have been many ideas and many attempts, and that's my whole point: is that we're sampling on success and not sampling on failure. And it's very important to sample on failure so that you realize how flawed we are, instead of assuming that, well, there's one genius out there that can fix a problem, because I don't see any evidence of that.
Like even when you make a thing, if you make a book, or you make a drawing, or you make a program, which individual people do, and I've done, right? Not a book, but the way you do it is you make a crappy version and then you iterate on it. It gets less crappy, and then and lots of it doesn't work, and then eventually you figure out how parts of it work, and then it takes time, and it does take lots of failure, but you can eventually get it working.
I guarantee you, at some point, some guy was like, "We should put a chain around it," and everybody was like, "That's a terrible idea, but let's work it out." Someone had to come up with the idea. Ideas don't just come out of multiple people's heads all at once, and it comes out of one person's head.
No, sometimes they do come
I've-
out, but from multiple people. I mean, there's lots of parallel discoveries.
Well, I've never had an idea in my head that came out of multiple people, is what I'm saying. And
Okay.
anytime I've worked in a group of people, I've never had a bunch of people all at once say we should do something. It's always one person suggests something, and then people discuss it.
I mean, I do think there's something where like somebody will come up with something that's a weird kind of outside the box idea. Maybe they thought, let's put a rope around the church, and then somebody said, that's really dumb, but we could do it with a chain. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then somebody said, no, we can't do it with a chain because of this. And then somebody else said, oh, but if we heat it up, then it'll work. Or maybe they even tried some of those things, you know. But so, yeah, I mean,
Like you've worked on a work
Yeah.
site before, eh, Michael?
What?
Like you've worked on, like you're a construction guy, right?
Yeah.
If I got that right, a carpenter.
Yeah.
I mean, have you worked at a job site before where no one knew how to solve a problem, and then one person came up with something that seemed completely useless kind of idea, but it still worked out?
Yeah. Yeah, we have like
Yeah.
we have a meeting about this like every day. Just like that's the thing. Like people think like here's a problem, here's a solution. There's like 1,000 solutions to every problem, like
Right.
practical problems. You know, not in math, then it gets postmodern. You know, but
Yeah.
in reality. But that's the thing. You know, it's always that thing of people falling in love with their theories and then then they have sunk costs and they never know how to walk away from it. But
Preach, brother. It's like my perennial issue. How did I get in this problem? Why am I dealing with it? Is it even my problem?
yeah,
I'm
well,
just
like
pacing.
80% of my job is fixing somebody else's problems. So that's
Mhm.
fun because first I have to figure out how they screwed it up and then how to fix it. But
So you were saying the question was about how many times you got it wrong, and this is something I haven't really thought about, because it does seem like when you make a thing, you do get it wrong a lot of times, right? Like you do get it wrong
Hope so.
100 times, and it works.
That's how you
100%,
learn.
right? Yes, but why is it? It seems like you were saying specifically that it was valuable to keep track of, like, keep a tally of how many times you got it wrong. And
No.
Okay.
It's what's important to realize is that in history, we tend to look back in particular and go, oh, like that guy had, an idea. So like this happens all the time. Like who invented the car, right? And then a lot of people will either go with Ford, right? Because obviously he didn't, right? Or they'll go with Benz. But it turns out like there's 3 inventors that invented, something like an internal combustion engine all around the same time, right? And we almost discount that sort of operation, and even some of the necessary subcomponents of the car, right? Like some people invented them and their inventions failed. Not that their inventions were bad; some of them were better than the ones that ended up being taken up, right? We're not accounting for that, and so what happens is we get the success bias, right? And then we start thinking, oh, well, somebody has an idea, and then they just implement it, and then just problem solve. But that doesn't represent what actually happened in linear time as it unfolded, right? And so we don't have a proper
Keep
sense
talking.
for how much failure is inherent in our projects, and then we expect them to go well a lot quicker than they should with a lot less
that's
effort.
insane. Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
So okay, like a car, like I don't know how one person could ever build a car. Like even like a baby toy car sounds like almost impossible, right? But like okay, so like 2 people invented calculus at like the same time, and that does seem like a thing you could in theory invent in your basement, right? But like, how did 2 people invent calculus at the same time? How does that work out? What was going on? Do you have any idea what happened? Like I still like think about that and I go like, what were the like underlying intuitions people had to have at the same time? Were they reading the same people? Was it, because it doesn't seem like it was even like a small gap. It was like, no, this guy like had devised like a lot of information based on like, a few core insights. And then
Well, but it's actually
Are
really
you
easy
math
to
people?
understand that. right? Because Jonathan Peugeot talks about this. What is the world to him? He says that the world is attention. Okay, well, if the world is attention, why are people all working on the same problem at the same time? Well, because the world's attention, and once either somebody brings it up, right, or it becomes a blockade in the world, everybody goes after it. Like everybody starts working on the problem. And see, this is what I mean by we misread history all the time, because when you look back, there were lots of people working on calculus, and some of them for different reasons. And many times they don't know who else is doing it. And so the invention of the telephone is like that too, right? There was initially Alexander Graham Bell was working on it. He didn't know somebody else was working on it. There's a whole bunch of controversy over who actually invented what, and maybe Graham stole a patent or two, right? But people were working on that problem. Why? Because the revolution of the telegraph was huge, and everybody wanted to be the next person to invent the telegraph. Right. And so you don't have a situation with the telephone in particular where you only have one person working on it. That never happened. And it didn't come out of nowhere. Everybody already understood the power of inventing something like a telephone. Same with radio.
Okay. That makes sense.
Electric guitar too. There's like 3 people that simultaneously like all came to the same conclusion, more or less.
So, like, what's the thing before calculus? Where someone was like, "Oh, this guy named Al Jaber invented something 600 years ago, and now we can invent the new algebra." Was this the thing?
Was it really named after somebody?
It was like, what's up?
Algebra was named after someone?
Yeah, after an Islamic guy. There was a guy.
Oh, there you go.
It was like an Islamic guy, and like the guys who like rediscovered it were like like these monks, right? Who were like could read some of this stuff, and they were reading it so they could read more Greek stuff, right? And yeah, that was invented by a Muslim guy named something like Al Jaber. And there was same thing with a lot of early science was like devised by some Islamic guys who were like, I think they were doing stuff with optics. I think that's how that started.
Lots of sand to make glass, I guess.
Yeah.
Matthew, he invented math.
And confirm.
Boom. Nicely done.
But a lot of this stuff is look, there's an ethos, right? There's something in the air, and then people are working on it. And then to some extent, who comes up with the idea is random chance. And we don't appreciate that. We kind of think like, oh, this guy walking down the street one day and invented the telephone. It's like, no, everybody was. And the reason, it's so funny, the reason why they were doing stuff, the reason why the guy who funded Alexander Graham Bell funded him was purely political. It was purely around taxes and getting a handle on what was happening in communication. Like, he didn't care about the tech at all. And a lot of people think, oh, well, these inventors are inventing purely for invention. And most of them are motivated either by politics or by just inventing something cool, right? So like, if you look back in history, J.P. Morgan's from a wealthy family, right? They get all the money in the world, right? And he goes, no, I want to fund inventions. And his father's like, why? We're a bank. We own the money supply from Europe to the United States. Like they own the whole thing. And then it just turned out that he was like, no, I want to own something that I funded that, makes me one of these great titans of, now we call them the robber barons, which is totally unfair, right? He wanted to be part of that. He didn't want to just be a banker. And, ended up the wealthiest man in the world for a long time too, or at least in control of more wealth than anybody else, right? And he did the big deals, with Carnegie and stuff to make the big steel company, right? And a whole bunch of other
Caesars.
stuff nobody knows about.
Bunch of Caesars.
So what were we talking about?
Many things.
Oh,
J.P. Morgan.
But okay.
The inventions, how people invent things all at the same time. some sort of what do they call that? Some bioluminescent ether that I forget the term for it. Some dude
You're
came
just
up with
talking
it.
about synchronicity?
Yeah, but there were morphogenetic field. That dude that came up with that whole idea that there's some
you're
sort
talking
of
about the
field.
the 100th monkey thing or something, right? Oh man.
I have no clue.
I don't think you need any of that. You can just say attention. Like the world is vast, and our attention needs to be pointed someplace in order for us to build something. And if we don't have a common aim, we're not going to get together and use the distributed cognition necessary to build the thing, right? And so that requires a bunch of submission in the process.
So I'm interested in your projects. So you said you built what my brain said was ritual, but that's not what you said. You said a practice. You guys built a practice. How did that work?
Yeah, there's practice. So Vervaeke has a bunch of practices that he's resurrected, cobbled together from Christianity and Buddhism and Stoicism and, ancient Greek stuff, right? He's got the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series, which is misnamed. It should be called Awakening to the Meaning Crisis. And actually, he just did a talk with somebody who named the talk that. I was like, good. The Awakening from part is really in this meditation series, right? Which is when I really got into them, actually. Although I watched Awakening from the Meaning Crisis when it came out in order. And his Cultivating Wisdom series, right? So those are the two series where he goes into practices. His meditation's one practice, and his meditation's rather unique, actually. I rather recommend it. It's quite nice. But there's other practices as well, mostly part of the ancient Greek tradition in Cultivating Wisdom. He's going through Epicureanism and Stoicism and, his much vaunted Neoplatonism, which I think is a total fake out. But there are practices there. And then one practice he had, for example, was, John talks a lot about communitas, right? But then meditation is a solitary thing. Like you meditate alone, although to be fair, in the East, they meditate alone in a room together, right? So it's a little bit more communal. And he had a practice based on Lectio Divina, the Christian practice. And we modified that to be a group practice, right? And then we've got a bunch of learning about practices, right? We've got 300 pages of notes just in one file, right? We've got all kinds of frameworks, right, and models that can be used to build things, right? Because part of the thesis that we were operating under on the Awakening server was whatever Jordan Peterson did is best understood by John Vervaeke's meaning framework or science of meaning. And so once you have John Vervaeke's science of meaning, as many differences as I have with John on a bunch of his stuff that I think is flat out wrong, it's very useful to have that framework to build things with. And so we've been using that framework to build things, right? And in the meantime, we've actually been doing stuff. Like we still meditate every day, right? I ran the meditation this morning. Manuel's out of town for a couple of days. He usually runs it, right? But typically there's someone there. And when Manuel and I aren't there, somebody else picks it up more often than not, right? That's been going on for 2.5 years, right? A little more than that. So, that's something worth taking relatively seriously, right? And, people, we want to cooperate. We want to do this. We want to do that. Well, that's great. Let's do it, right? But then again, even with Grimm, I had 2 or 3 people doing this Beholder project, but okay, but what? That's great. Why isn't that enough? Like how many do you really need? Like why can't you start small, right? And then Jacob, I want a 24/7 stream network. We don't have that much content. Why are you shooting so high? You can't even get something going, every Thursday. That would be a nice start.
Well, I was thinking like if somebody just rigs it up to play all the backlog of all the channels, then because that's what a lot of those channels that have those like live streams going, it's just playing old content constantly.
Well, that's good if it's good content and if new people can get into it. But most of the content, I would argue, isn't of that nature. And look, if you want to go back through and figure out what belongs in what order and what people can handle,
that's crazy.
Well, see, this is the problem, right? Everybody wants to bite the whole elephant, but that's not how you eat an elephant. And I'm not saying don't aim high, but have realistic expectations. Like before you say 24/7 news network, say, what I'd like to do is start some programming on a regular basis, right? because I want to start a 24/7 news network. Oh, okay. Well, now it sounds plausible. When you open with 24/7 news network, that's what we need. You sound insane.
Well, it didn't
It's
sound like
too
you
big
wanted
a-
to
it's
make
too
a
big an
news
elephant.
network. It sounded like you wanted
I
to just
think
have
Pa-
people.
yeah,
Have
Paul
people-
keeps saying it that way in like hyperbole, you know, of the language. But I think that it was just to have, like, I think Jacob just realized that it's more, people enjoy it more and get more out of it if he has just chatting rather than when he has some axe to grind and he wants to make a video about it. And you know,
Well,
everybody
look at
disagrees
this,
with him,
if you're going to do 24/7, you can't do one type of content anyway.
yeah.
So that's not a problem. But then the problem is, well, what type of content and what schedule do you put? See what I'm saying? Like there's little problems that are very solvable, and we're trying to eat the elephant. And you, like, why are we trying to eat an elephant? You eat an elephant one bite at a time. Can we figure out what bites to take? Wouldn't that be a lot easier? Don't you think that's like reasonable?
So like for solving certain problems, I think that's good. Sometimes you do have to have something to aim for, which is also good. So, right? Isn't that true? Isn't it true that like it's nice to like, hey,
No,
even if you never build a cathedral, if you're building a wall and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to build a cathedral one day, doesn't that like make it nicer to build the wall? I don't know. That seems like part of how things work.
Yeah, it can. But look, again, the missing piece to all this is you need to cooperate with others to do these big projects. And that's we don't have the skills of cooperation anymore. Literally, even in this corner of the internet, we're able to talk. That's great. It's a good plus. We're way ahead of everybody else, but we're not far enough ahead to cooperate and actually get a project going, you know? And that's what I'm saying is that we need to engender that level of humility so that, we don't end up to Joey's comment over engineering everything, right? So we don't have to deal with people at a human level anymore. It's like, no, the point is to rebuild the human connections, but you're not doing that when you're not in service, right? And you're not in service if you're not in submission. And what do you submit to? You don't necessarily submit directly to the other people you're with, although you do that too. You submit to the common aim. Well, first you have to figure out what the common aim is, right? Mm-hmm. So the IRL Politic video, I forget the guy's name, right? I reached out to him. I'm like, great, you want to do video production? I have a project right now that I'm doing for Catherine, although I haven't been working on it this week, unfortunately. Shame on me, right? That would be great. I'll do the script, you do the video, right? Nothing. So he says he wants to cooperate. That's great. But then when it comes time to actually do anything, nobody wants to cooperate anymore because they have their vision of how things should be and how things should go and what they should look like. And they want that. And well, that's great. But then you have to do it by yourself. And now you're back to where you're not building a cathedral. and they're not recognizing that that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
Or you just have to only get people to participate who are beneath you, so they have to rely on you. That's how you build a cult, right?
That's how you build a good cult. Well, but that's the other problem. Nobody wants to lead, and leadership is a big sacrifice. Leaders
who will lead the cult?
leaders get they can't trust people. They get people talking behind their back. Everybody questions their decisions, right? And look, some decisions of leadership, and maybe most, are arbitrary, right? But you have to have one. So the fact that it's arbitrary doesn't mean anything. And we're living in a world where arbitrary things are discounted, when in fact arbitrariness as such is important, right? It's important that you pick an arbitrary thing in order to start your first step. So the fact that it's arbitrary doesn't denigrate it at all, or shouldn't, right? And because we're living in this postmodern critique time, it's a problem, right? It's a problem. We can't get together with each other and cooperate in the way that's needed to build something big, because we don't want leaders. We want to do circling, all the time, and everyone's equal, and it's not going to work. If everyone's equal, nothing's going to happen.
Well, that's the idea, right? Of cooperation. You have a comparative advantage, right? And you have people who are even if one person is better than at a person at everything, right? They can still they can still decide to do certain things and they can still have advantage, right? That's the basic idea behind trade and economics. And I don't know, people also want to hate economics. I don't really get it, but it works. Like,
well, some people can. And that's the other deep confusion, is that, people come up with these things. Well, everybody can contribute in the way that they can. And then if they can't contribute that way, they can contribute in another way. That's not true. It's just a lie, right? Some people are incapable of contributing except in one way. It's just people. Evolution is real, right? We're not all the same. We don't all have the same capacities. We don't all have the same skills, and we can't be all educated in the same way to the same level. That's a fantasy. It's an insane fantasy. And so, yeah, in theory, in an ideal world where you have all the people that you envision who operate that way, but that's not the world you're living in. And I'm not saying that there aren't groups that form like that, because of course that can happen. Like, we've got 8 billion people in the planet or something. So sure, in a big set like that, all kinds of wacky things are going to happen. But that's not something you can make happen reliably, right? Yeah. And, it's great when you have somebody who can fill in the gaps. And look, when I've done consulting for companies, I've noticed a clear trend. There's a handful of people that do almost all the work in the corporation. And they're very smart, and they fill in a bunch of holes in some cases that nobody even understands, right? And they make things work. And when they leave, the company fails. And you see that quite clearly. And sometimes it can just be one individual, although it's very rarely actually one. It's when we had 4 of these types of people with some overlap and some not overlap, right? And then the other 3 are gone. Now there's one left. And then when he's gone, it's all over. Or she, right? That happens. It happens at the project level. It happens at the corporate level, right? It happens at every level. It seems to be a perennial problem, right? There are some people, outliers, Pareto distribution, the whole 9 yards, right? That just operate at that level, and you need some number of them. And if you have too many, you have a different problem. There's whole management books on how do you manage a team of geniuses? Because if you have a team of geniuses, you have a big problem, and it's called ego. Because every genius has a different solution to the same problem, and they think theirs is superior. And in some ways, I'm sure they're right. And in other ways, they're wrong. And they're not qualified necessarily to make the decision on which of those arbitrary, because they sometimes arbitrary, best answers need to be picked. They don't know. They don't have that depth. It could be a marketing issue. And, inventors aren't good at marketing. That's why they're inventors, because there's way easier money in marketing. Right. So there's all these problems when you get into the real world with implementation, but you have to submit to the limitations of what you have. And especially when you're running a volunteer organization, like, you have to accommodate the people that you have. You can't reimagine the world where everybody can do a little bit of everything, because that may not be the world that you're going to get. Maybe it is. You get lucky. That happens. I'm not saying it doesn't exist.
Well, I mean, I see one problem. I see a problem in the fact that our society has been on a path of specialization for so long. Which I personally have ideas about some of the ways we can do better at that, but that seems like that's something that we have to fix, because specialization is great, but as you become more efficient, you need less specialists, and then a lot of people, the only thing they can specialize in is being consumers, and then they have a meaning crisis, because it doesn't take long to realize that is not your highest role. That's not the purpose you were created for. So,
well, and specialization is enforced by training. And I just released a video on my channel, Navigating Patterns, about education versus training. And I don't think we have any understanding that we're not educating people for the most part. We're actually training them. And look, you have to train people. I'm not saying don't train people. I think training's fine, right? But we think we're educating people. And then we expect them to be educated, and they're not. And we told them that they are, so they act as if they are. And then they create lots of damage because they're not, right? And so I think the proper mode of education is you know, and I'm using a bastardized hybrid way of talking about this that I don't particularly care for, right? Is the participatory knowledge that John Vervaeke talks about, right? That's where education occurs. In other words, you can't educate someone by giving them propositions. Like, I think if you think that, I think you're completely deluded. Like, I don't even
So
think
you
it's
need to
possible.
train them.
Yeah, you can only train them, right? You can only hold them to a standard, because propositions, in order to be useful, have to have a tight set, basically. Because when you start making propositions that are floating, now you get it into subjectivity, and now people don't know what you're talking about anymore, right? And
So what would be a floating proposition?
now love is a floating proposition, right? They can say, "I love you, man." Okay.
I don't know. I think love's a pretty real proposition.
I didn't say it wasn't real. I said it's
I'm-
floating. Like, you know, I didn't. In reality, didn't
By
enter
that,
into
you
the
mean
definition.
it just means different things to different people.
So what?
When I say I
like,
love you,
explain
it
what do you
means,
mean
like,
a
I'm with you
floating
forever, and
proposition?
to you, it means you feel good when you look at me. And these are drastically different things. And yeah,
Right. Which doesn't mean you shouldn't use it, or it doesn't, like, I'm not a materialist, so that's not a problem for me, right? But when you're trying to grade somebody on how well they're doing, you can't grade somebody on love. And it doesn't make any sense, right? And so but you still need to learn to love, for example, like, right? Like, you still need to learn justice, right? But how do you learn? I contend you can only learn those things through participation. And what have we taken out of schools? We took religion and art and music and gym and recess out of schools. Not entirely, right? But we've removed some of that from the school system. And now we have this big crisis around people who appear to have gotten through high school and also appear to not understand things that people who went to high school 10 years before knew. So it looks like the standard of education has actually gone down, at least with respect to how people participate in the world. And I think that, you know, if you want to cause a meaning crisis, a good way to do it is to make sure people don't know how to participate in the world, including with one another, right? Because cooperation is one of the skills that you're only going to get from participation and play.
Okay. So I was gonna argue with you about the propositional argument because it was because it made me think of catechism, right? Like here's like you can like get someone on board with these series of propositions by asking the series of questions or whatever. But if you go look at how Catholics actually do things, it's like they do a little bit of that, but they also like have a lot of ritual and they do all this stuff. And like, well, that's one half of the problem. Now it's the other half. So,
Right. And like, I'm not saying like throw out propositions. We don't need them. No one's saying we need propositions to communicate. Like, the mode of communication is language. Language is primarily propositional, right? It's based on the idea of propositions. And that's what we use. In fact, I think that's where Ian McGilchrist gets confused, right? Because he's looking at language and making assumptions about how we think. And well, that's good, except language is propositional. And so it's going to skew your data a little bit if you don't understand the problem that poses. And I think that
Do you think outside of language ever?
what's it depends how you define language. Is body language language? That's the first question.
Well, but I'm specifically talking about your thoughts. Like when you're thinking, do you think outside of language?
Yeah, I don't think language has anything to do with anything. It's a fairly
Well, no, I mean it does because we like you just brought language into the conversation.
Yeah,
So I'm
it.
asking a simple question, like, you know, do you when you're thinking, do you think in word thoughts or
No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
Language is
Again,
an
I
encoding
don't
system
think
of
language is anything.
You-
Language is for communication.
But do you think when you are thinking, Mark? Do you think in words?
No, it's still no. It's still no.
You don't. Okay.
No, I don't.
I'm going to leave this conversation because you just kind of take up all the air and you're just kind of contradictory, dude. Like, I'm not having fun. See you later.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
Sorry to hear that.
Well, dude, you're not sorry to hear it. You're just like an airbag. Like, dude, there's like 2 other dudes and you're taking up the whole stream. And every time someone says something, you're just shooting them down. It's so not fun. Bye-bye.
So that is an interesting phenomenological question, though. Like, okay, when you experience a thought in your head, sometimes it does take the form of noise, of words, right? And sometimes it takes the phenomena of other phenomena like a picture, right?
And underlying that has to be somehow out of that you construct meaning. I don't know exactly how that works. And then that somehow gets encoded into words when we're trying to communicate with other people. Like, this is a very reasonable question. I just I don't really know how that works.
Yeah, well, and I think again the problem is the measurement problem. When we try to convey how we think to people, we have to use words. We have no choice, right? And in fact, when we try to inspect our own thinking, a lot of times we use words. But that doesn't mean that's what's happening in our heads. This is what I meant by Ian McGilchrist in the experiments that he's using, because I've seen some of them. Some of them are very old, actually, especially the split brain stuff is really old. The mistake they make is that when you measure thoughts coming in and going out, if you look at the brain activity, of course you're going to get the other side of the brain again, because when you input stuff into the brain, especially if it's language, the language center lights up. And then when you talk about it, the language center has to light up again. And if you take that second measurement seriously, you're making a mistake because you're mistaking the observation for the data, and that the observation's not the data. Because we don't know how to activate the brain. And there's a bigger thought too, which is it's not, our emotions are also forms of thinking. And so you can't think and have an emotion at the same time, it seems. And if that's true, and I think it is, that sort of says something significant about what's going on, right? Because emotions
you can't think and have an emotion at the same. So like poetry seems to be like you've somehow encoded an emotion into words, and then you have triggered some sort of emotion in another human being when you read the poem, right? And this seems to be I don't know how you say that's not a thought. That seems very strange. Like it seems like the central example of a thought is, in fact, like to me, like the central example of a thought is the sound of words in my head. Although definitely there are other kinds of thoughts. And so like that can't be true, right? Otherwise poetry would be impossible, right?
No, you can inspect how you used to feel and write it down. I think that's how memory works. But
no. Okay. You read a poem. That poem makes you sad, probably. That's most of the time when I read a poem. And then so you read a poem, you're crying while you read the poem. You can't like not be feeling a feeling or not thinking a thought. You have to be doing both somehow, right? That has to be possible.
I don't think it does. I mean, a lot of people stop in the middle of reading poetry, right? Because they have to, quote, consider it. And it's like, okay, well, you can't read the words and think at the same time. It doesn't mean you can't slice it up real fine, because I think that happens, right?
Okay. Yeah.
But I mean, have you ever been overwhelmed by emotion where you can't think? Because that happens to most people.
So again, like it seems like maybe you're thinking of a different kind of thought. Maybe you can't be analytical and emotional at the same time. And this might be true. I can believe that. But like when I'm angry, I'm often yelling, and words are a kind of thought. I don't know, like it seems sort of obvious to me. Is this what you mean though? Is it just the division between like emotion and analysis? Right?
I think
you're trying to make?
Yeah, our version of analysis of ourselves is wrapped up in language. And often when you're having a really strong feeling, you can't speak. You actually can't speak.
Okay. Yeah, sometimes that does happen. But that's a particular kind of feeling. But yeah, you get this sort of like lump on your throat and like you can't communicate anymore. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
So it's like bandwidth.
So like to me, that's one type of analysis where you're using verbal analysis, right? But there's also phenomenological analysis, right? You can feel a sensation, you can break that sensation up into parts, you can feel a sensation and it will break apart into energy, right? And you can instead of feeling tension, you feel this sort of buzzing in the muscle area, right? And of course, oh wow, I'm really angry. But what is my anger? Oh, it's a bunch of muscle tension in my stomach and in my back and this heat in my chest, right? And this is one type of analysis, right? And so like to me, like is this really a division between the verbal and the phenomenological and the emotional and the analytical, and how do those get divided up exactly?
Well, I think, yeah,
a big project.
that right. Well, it's a good question, but I don't think they are divided up. Like I said, I think it's all the same thing, and maybe we're dealing with a bandwidth problem, right?
Okay.
And so,
oh, that's sensible.
right, because this makes something like Stoicism make sense. Because what's happening in Stoicism is you're building a space between where you are, right, and your emotional reaction, right? So, Stoics try not to like jump into an emotional response to something, right? When they feel an emotion, they go, "Oh, I'm feeling an emotion. I better not do anything," right? And that's the problem is that we get overwhelmed by our emotions, and then we look back and we go, oh, right? I mean, it's encoded in law, right? Did you kill somebody due to your passion in the moment? Because that's different legally than if you planned it. Well, planning is thinking, and being overwhelmed by your passion, it's implied in the law, for example, that it's not thinking somehow, that you weren't of right mind in the moment. It's temporary insanity, right? To some extent. And temporary insanity is just being overwhelmed by your emotions and just taking an action. And that's the sort of thing that Stoicism is supposed to prevent. And so, it seems like a bandwidth issue, right? Like, oh, well, you're going to have enough bandwidth sometimes to talk and, talk about your feelings in the moment. Yeah, sure. That totally makes sense. But I don't think you can do the two at the same time, because sometimes your emotions completely overwhelm your ability to even speak or to even think, right? And you just start acting. And then you look back and you go, well, I don't even know why I did any of that. Like, that doesn't seem like me, right? This happens to people. And maybe not commonly, or maybe way more commonly than we realize.
Well, like, we're not aware of everything we do, right? Like, I'm speaking, but I'm not like, it's like I'm trying to analyze like how my muscles are working in my mouth. That's hard to do. That's hard to do at the same time, right? And certainly that's not how I do it. I'm not thinking, oh, I'm going to pull this muscle back in my throat to pull my tongue back a little bit, and this is how I'm going to verbalize the word or whatever, right? So that's not really how that happens. We have this encoded behavior where it must be something like a function, right? That's being called up to like draw off these individual words, and this has to happen at the same time we're thinking. I remember one guy was a monk. He was talking about like how there isn't really an instance of like thought before your words, right? It's like your thoughts give rise to the possibility of speaking or something like this, right? But I don't know how that works really.
Well, for some people, I think I don't have any illusions that my thoughts aren't occurring without my words. They clearly are. It happens all the time.
Yeah, my wife is much more of a verbal processor, so she says things and then she has to hear her own words to think about what she's thinking. So I always thought this is an interesting thing I read. This is from the book I was talking about yesterday, Roots of Western Culture, Pagan, Secular, and Christian Options. But in regards to self-knowledge, we can obtain genuine self-knowledge only by way of religious concentration. When we draw together the totality of our existence, which diverges within time in a multiplicity of functions, and focus it upon our authentic, fundamental relationship to God, who is the absolute and single origin and creator of all that is. Because of the fall, however, no person can any longer attain this true self-knowledge. Self-knowledge, according to Scripture, is completely dependent on true knowledge of God, which humankind lost when apostate ground motives took possession of its heart. Humankind was created in God's image, but when it lost the true knowledge of God, it also lost the true knowledge of itself. So I just think that thing of just that, concept that we're always, when we're trying to understand ourselves, we're never doing it the right way. Which is, it's funny because that's the thing, when if you have kids, then you realize it the most, because you always hear parents saying like, "Oh my gosh, that's me. They're doing exactly the thing I do," but you don't see it until you see somebody else doing it. So, but that's what we do with all of our things.
Well, it's contrast. That's how we see. We see with contrast. And so until somebody does the thing that we do, who isn't us, we don't know that we do it, because you can't see yourself, right? You just can't. It's not an option. And we don't understand. Like, most people do not get it. Like, our visual system, actually the way our eyes work through pure contrast. So your eyes, the fovea of your eyes that Jordan Peterson talks about, are constantly jiggling back and forth and up and down and in all kinds of directions. And if they didn't do that, and in cases where they don't do that, because there was such a case, it's how they found this out, you can't see. Like, your eyes can work and all the signals can come to your brain, and you don't register the world.
Yeah, that's the thing that happens. People who can meditate well can like make their eyes sit still, and when they do, their vision goes gray. Just goes totally gray. You can't see a thing.
Yeah, I practice like an open eye meditation, and like you just see the layers of images sort of like line up over itself over a while when you're not trying to pay attention to it. The movement and the refresh rate of like blinking, moving, and scanning and stuff like that is the thing. I like how there's like, we noticed this because we've seen where it wasn't.
Yeah. Well, the way they found out about it was, there was I forget what I saw. It was probably PBS. I watched a lot of PBS over the years. There was a guy in Japan who was born without his optic nerve connected, but all the mechanics were there. So they go in, and he's like 25 years old or something, right? They reconnect his optic nerve, and they're checking it out. All the signals are there, and he can't see. And they're like, "What the hell's going on?" And like, sometimes he catches glimpses of things, and they're like, "We don't understand this." So they put him on this, on a screen, and they show him objects, and they figure out that he can only see the objects when he moves his head. And then they're like, "Oh." And I forget how they fixed it, but basically they figured out, eyes normally move involuntarily all the time, and it's super high rate of vibration. And that's how we actually functionally see, even when we're relatively still.
Yeah, it's like we notice everything based on adaptation. So like, it's comparing and contrasting, and what we can do within the difference. It was like a lot of what you guys sounded like you were talking about before, with the man cannot know something unless it is in comparison to God. It reminds me of sub-creation. Are you guys familiar with that?
No.
Sub-creation?
No.
Or not when you say that. So yeah.
Yeah. Tolkien talked about it a lot. It's essentially the idea was that man is a sub-creator, in that we are made in the image of God, like you were kind of saying before, but we are not God in the sense that we cannot create new things, but we can create new combinations of things in sort of like harmony with each other. And so that's what like a story is. It is a sub-creation. It is not something new in the sense that it is not like a new flower or anything like that, but it is a new ordering of things that exist in a way that shows or tries to reveal something higher than itself. I don't know if that like sounds different or sounds similar to like what you guys were talking about previously.
Well, no, that's what we were talking about. I mean, because it's better to just start doing something badly and learn from that and grow, and you'll learn so much faster than you can do all the research you want, like and I know this was like I always say like the good example is cutting crown molding. It's counterintuitive, because the best way to do it is you have to cut it upside down and backwards, and it's like, what does that mean? I don't know. You can watch 10 videos on it. You're gonna screw up at least a few cuts before you really understand what that means, and then you got it. So, that's how it is. And that's when you encounter like those people who are experts about a thing, but not like at a thing. So
Yeah, like armchair experts and things like that. Yeah, there's like an interesting comparison I have with that, because there's also the flip side of it. There's like, because that's actually what artificial intelligent art is. It's recursive failures, just on repeat and forever, until there's something that it deems a success.
Well, and I think we're right into the what I would call the most important core concept, which is there's this propositional knowledge and there's this participatory knowledge. There's two types of ways of knowing the world, and I want to put it in two, even though I'm bastardizing John's knowing and my own model, right? But if you think about it in those terms, just because it's easier to think about it that way, then what you end up with is you can know propositionally all you want, but that's not a substitute for knowing participatorily, right? And that's those who can't teach, right, and those who can do, right? There's little sayings like that all the time, and it's not 100% true. There are some teachers who are very good because they know how to do it, but those are rare, actually. And again, this is what I was talking about before with sampling. If you sample all the successes, if you just look at the good teachers, they can all do things and teach about them. But most teachers aren't good teachers, right? So it's like, oh, well, that changes the game. And then when you think about the world that way, you have to think about, well, what does participation require that propositions don't? Propositions can exist purely within your head, and you manipulate them infinitely inside your head, and it's not a problem. And so you can do strange things with propositions. Like one of the bugaboos I've been talking about it for 3 straight days now. It's come up in different contexts. The idea of social justice makes no sense. It's not a way to communicate a concept in the language, in any language, because societies don't exist without justice, and the concept of justice only works within a society.
Yeah.
So taking those two words apart from one another and then trying to juxtapose them in that way or put them together in that way doesn't work as a form of coherent communication to other people. It's rhetoric. It's not to say that they're not talking about an important concept. I'm just saying that when you try to use the language in that way, it fails, right? Because it's a very postmodern thing to do. And that's why if you get a bunch of people together anarcho-capitalism is another one. It doesn't make any sense. No possible framework in the world where anarcho-capitalism makes any sense, because you can't separate economics from your governmental system that way. It doesn't work. And so
my favorite is anarcho-monarchism, because it's just like there's a monarchy, but people do whatever they want still, and it's just like. That happens because you can't exist in any framework without willingly doing something. Even if you're resisting in contrast to the thing.
And that creates a purely subjective language, right? Yeah. And you can pretend as though it's not subjective, because you can pretend you have agreement because you're using the same words, but that actually isn't true. You ask for an anarcho-capitalist what the definition is, and you're not going to get enough, overlapping concept.
Well, then the thing that's missing, Mark, is, there's probably another P missing, but the thing that's missing is also procedure, because the thing that, participation with, propositions, they just exist in isolation. Participation technically does exist within the world and informs, the own experience, but unless there is a process, which is almost something like in between, it is proposed participation. Like you have to do the steps within it. You have to understand each moment. That's where the construction begins to sort of take a bit more of a shape, and that's why social justice rhetoric, it always fails, because no matter what intentions they want to solve racism and make people be their true selves, and all of those different things, the moment it's instantiated into a process, it becomes corrosive.
Right. It doesn't have any commonality, right? And so you can't proceduralize it. But but that's why you can't participate with it. So there are propositions that you can create that you can't participate within in the world. And when you don't know that, you try to propose things that no one can participate with you, and that's when things start to fail. And that's, but you're right. I mean, there is a perspectival, and if you want to use John's model, right, it's procedure, and perspectival are the other two P's of knowing.
Yeah.
I've got my issues with that, but it's a good point. Like the idea of participating in the world requires some form of submission, because the minute I have to do something with another person, like log into a stream, well, now I have to get my Chromebook out because I'm participating with somebody else and they're using my damn laptop, right? And then I have to, I have to make sure StreamYard is okay on this platform, right? And then I have to allow the stupid camera and mic for and then I have to talk to you people who don't seem to just understand all the things in my head automatically, and I don't know why. And then I have to.
No, I got it.
With you, right? Right. Well, there's a lot of submission in that, right? I mean, just the time, energy, and attention, is good. It's a good start, but I have to find a way to communicate, and then I have to, be able to listen to people, which I'm not terribly good at sometimes, for sure. Right. So there's all these issues with that. With that level of engagement, but when you choose to engage, it is an active submission.
Yeah, like one of the things that I've been noticing, sort of applying Peugeot's principles and patterns, and I see it with art as sort of like the main thing that is being ignored is there is only celebration. There is no contemplation or reflection or places and stasis. Like I can't remember who was saying it before, but there was, like, we were talking about Lord of the Rings and Miyazaki and sort of understanding them as art and how we judge them as different from past masters. I think that's the main reason for that, is because they don't offer reflection. They don't offer a moment to actually, separate ourselves, dedicate ourselves to it. Like, we get to celebrate it. We get to have the ecstasy of not being in our own body for that controlled period of time, or like art is trying to emulate experience for us that we don't actually have. Like, I think Mark, you were saying something about, like, there's no 3D space, in the sense that, like, if you're in a 3D space, there's one wall literally gone. You've broken a wall, and the architecture and design and like the visual experience that you are in, it's still trying to relay something that is designed, that isn't actually of your own volition or something like that. But the thing that's missing is that contemplation, that internalization. I think that comes, like you were talking about the practices within Viveki's Discord. Like, those are the things that sort of almost get missed. Like, we listen to podcasts, we listen to conversations, but the moment we're like, okay, now apply it within a certain framework. Like, apply it within something that actually is about internalizing it. I don't know how else to say it. Like, there's like, meditate on it, like reflect on it. Those things that, like, we talk about as the demands of it, they make the art more significant, but they also make it investing and stuff like that. And that's the same with kind of people. It's just like, I have ideas and all those things, like you just said, but it's just like, you kind of realize when you're talking to people that you have to listen and you have to get their perspectives, and you have to not only just argue, you kind of have to reflect what they say. You guys saw Peterson and Harris, the Toronto, the big Dublin tour ones, yeah?
Yeah, the four big debates.
I thought the best part of them was when they steel-manned each other's sides, because that's like one of those things that, like, that's a really important thing to sort of reflect on, that type of stuff. I don't know, like, the places where people reflect within art, I think they're vanishing the most, because that requires I don't know, it's not distraction, but whatever you call the opposite of attention, where like you are intensely focused on your own experience instead of
Well,
like extending.
Awareness, maybe. Is it awareness?
You know
Yeah,
what?
I mean, I like what you're saying there. I really
think
like that.
I would say the time when most people reflect on anything is when they fail. And failure requires attempt first. So yeah, people have to start doing stuff.
Well,
Yeah.
and the point about contemplation too. I think what you're maybe circumambulating around is that if the contemplation isn't common enough, then you're off in your own little bubble. So you can do all the contemplation you want on modern art, but it's not pointed at the highest, and so it doesn't have the same effect as that older art. And look, Tolkien was pointed in the right place. So maybe when you remake the Lord of the Rings and you do a really good job, which was done and didn't have to be, then, you get some of that back for sure. Right. Is that the same as going and being in a chapel? No, because again, you're projecting yourself from your mind into a world that is two-dimensional fundamentally. Right, because it's on a screen, and so you're not there. You're not getting the smells. You're not getting you're not getting the taste of the food. You're really not getting a sense for how tiring it is to be a poor sprinting dwarf who has to become a long distance runner. Right, you're not getting any of that sense. Right, which is there's nothing wrong with that. I didn't get that sense from the book either. Right, although it tries to do that, and it does a very good job in both the books and the movies, I would say. Right, but it's still not the same as actually doing it. Like, you're still never going to be a dwarf who's a natural sprinter. Who knew?
Very dangerous over short distances.
Very
Yeah,
dangerous
I like.
over short distances, yes.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Like, because it translates a lot of the time. A lot of the time, what it does is it seems to translate as what is your intention with your output, and like, how conscious of that should you be versus how unconscious and how like sort of action you should almost be. Like, there's like this, I don't know, there's this, I write poetry and there's a thing that I'm trying to work on. I was kind of alluding to it before, but like to me, the highest is always in a place where faith and doubt are the same. Like, if I know where the highest is, then I'm pointing in the wrong direction. If that makes sense? Like, yeah, the affirmation of knowledge there has to be a certain level of doubt. Like, I've talked about this with Rafe, and there's a video I did with Luke on it, and it's this idea that like there's this assumption that faith is a mode of being, and the way that I've begun to think about it is faith is the mode where action can actually happen. Like, the idea that like faith is that middle space between the external reality and internal belief. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the same. Like, there's a difference between art where you can tell like the artist was like, I need to make this because it's only by making this that I'm going to figure out what I'm trying to figure out, versus like they're making the art because they have to say the thing that they've already figured out. The weird example I can think of, which is I just like Ayn Rand. I'm not like a super fan. I'm not really at all. I would say more or less, but I would say like, so Atlas Shrugged was like her magnum opus. It's like, that was the book she always wanted to make, and she thought like The Fountainhead didn't quite get it across, and I thought like, no, The Fountainhead, she was pursuing this thing, and it didn't totally communicate her ideal that she perfectly ended up on, but it was like truer and better to me, whereas Atlas Shrugged was like just a comic book almost. Like,
you were being beaten over the head with something.
yeah,
I tried to read it, and it was like, we get it.
Yeah.
And like that's a really good point, because I think that place of doubt, that is something that allows the observer to put themselves into it. Like good art, like I'm gonna say it. No, like good art from an artist's perspective is art that you find. It's not something that you create. Like I don't know, like illustration, that's really hard in my opinion, because it requires you to have so much patience with a mode, with an idea or something like that. But like definitely like whenever I look at poetry, or even when I observe it, it's just like there is like it is. I never saw that before, but of course that should be there. Like that wasn't my idea. This wasn't, but that's the only thing that belongs there. Like there is like that point where it's just like, oh yeah, this makes sense. It's like it's half intuition and half thought. It's this zone in between. It's a zone in between participation and proposition, because like participation is, you have to be very present in accordance to the senses, and you have to actually, you're the one acting, you're the one presenting agency, you're not responding as much. And well, proposition, you're sort of like, you're ideally creating things at the same time. So like there's the in-between space that you discover ideas that, come flying into your own head. That point of discovery is that's a similar thing to the contemplation point, or the awareness point, where you're not trying to judge what is happening, but you're just trying to be aware of it. You're trying to articulate it.
Joey said the Estuary Protocol is actually pretty good at getting people who haven't tested their ideas to start playing with them, trying and
Yeah.
That is a
Definitely.
good thing. Like because sometimes even just the first step of saying this stuff out loud, and then and then somebody who has more experience saying, no, that's not going to work, here's why, and then you kind of like, that helps. You can gain a lot of knowledge that way. And then you kind of like, then you save so much time, because you get through all the like the weeds, all the like obviously bad stuff that you just didn't know enough about, and then you're like, okay, well now we have a handful of things that we actually maybe should try. So
yeah, well, I think the advantage to the approach of Estuary is that it very much is like a playground, right? It's a neutral space where people can meet, and because it's neutral, everyone's kind of equal. But I think trying to maintain that equality through time, even maybe for a single meeting, is not a practical or required thing to do, right? Giving somebody a space where they can have a voice is super important, because then they can play. And to the extent that it's like a playground and people feel comfortable coming to the playground to play, that's great. Like that's exactly what you want.
Yep. Well, I was going to try to make it 3 hours. I guess I can just tell you about the project that I am working on, because I am trying to instantiate something in real life. Awesome. So my goal, so the background of it, when I went after high school, I went to this discipleship program. It was basically like an internship at a church, so you can learn how to work at a church in theory. It had some things it was good at, some other things not so great. One of the problems is that you are not leaving with either college credit or actual job training. So it's a little bit of a, I mean, unless if you want to work at a church, but it's good for it was good for personal development, but that was kind of a drawback. There are statistics that a lot of less young men are going to college these days because it's pointless. Unless if you are really good academically, but if you're average or whatever, or that's not something that's interesting, it's a waste of time. But they're not necessarily being funneled into useful jobs. So now, with my experience that I've had working construction, training guys and stuff, I'm trying to combine these two ideas. So, sort of a Bible training by means of learning construction trades. So, I can do carpentry, but I'm hoping to get other people involved who can teach other things. So, maybe like in the course of a 1-year program, you get a little sample of all these things. You might find out, oh, I really love plumbing, I want to do that. And then you have somebody that you can apprentice with longer term. If not, you've actually gained useful skills in the year. And I even thought for those who want to go work in churches, most people who go to college don't realize that if you're the pastor of a small church, a la PVK, a lot of that job is things like building maintenance or, fixing stuff at the elderly people's houses. I mean, this was my whole youth was spent mowing people's lawns and shoveling their driveways and all this stuff. So, and my dad, who was the pastor, would go over there and fix stuff. And, that's just the reality of it. And you don't learn that in college. So, so this is my goal, is to create a program to kind of put those things together. Because even though I was thinking, like, you have the Bible's full of all these metaphors of like how things in life relate to spiritual things. And the problem now is not that we don't understand the spiritual things, because people go on YouTube and have conversations about it all the time. It's that they don't have any knowledge of the basic things. They don't know how to build anything. They don't know anything about farming or, relationships. So they actually have to learn the mundane material side of the metaphor to understand the other side of it. So,
yeah,
So
I like that. And again, this goes back to that problem. Like, they don't know spirituality, right?
Yeah.
They know propositions about spirituality.
Yeah.
But you can't know spirituality propositionally at all because it's participation. So you want to do a trade school that's based around the biblical tradition, right? And weave those two things together, which I think, I think it's safe to say that's pretty brilliant. That's a great idea. Like, because that is what we need. We need more engagement in participation, right? Because the problem has been, we put people in school, we tell them they're smart, we give them a bunch of propositions and say, see, you have all these propositions, you're smart. And then they're Sam Harris. And it's just like, oh my good, like, you're making basic mistakes that any fourth grader should know better. Like, you can't, of course we don't have free will. If you don't have free will, you can't talk about the concept of free will. Like, just like, I don't even know what else, how you can't get, like, no, it's just so dumb. It's hard to imagine, right? But that's because he doesn't participate in the world correctly. And when you don't participate in the world correctly, the next thing you know, you think you're an ethical, you think you have ethics, right? You think you're a moral agent in the world. And the next thing you know, you don't care about dead babies in Hunter Biden's basement.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're not a moral agent in the world. And I was saying that long before this happened. I knew it was just a matter of time. And there you go. And that's because he doesn't participate in the world correctly. And when you don't participate correctly and you just have propositions and your spirituality propositionally, whether you're a Christian or not, it's a problem. Like, everything we know has to be backed up. This is why I'm a pragmatist. Like, pragmatists don't care about knowledge, information, whatever the hell you want to call it, that doesn't lead to outcomes in the world, except when they're trying to be entertained or deliberately going on a philosophical exploration, right? Which, so we don't say never do those two things, right? Because they don't have an effect on the world. Like, no, that's absurd, right? But avoid things like that. You avoid using terms like social justice because you can't communicate that way, right? You can signal people for sure, and that is a form of communication, but you can't, doing that with words is absurd because it just breaks language. And then, now you have a different problem. Then everyone's blaming the breakdown of language for everything. It's like, well, no, it's postmodernism that broke down the language that causes everybody to believe that they have some authority to break down the language, which, you cannot participate with other people by breaking the language, but it's not helpful. So when you're reinstilling those two things together, you're saying, here's the Bible, right? And here's how it relates to this trade, this physical action in the world. It doesn't have to be a trade, it could be anything, but I like your concept of making it into a useful trade. That makes all the difference in the world. So I really like that idea.
Yeah, I'm trying to. As I have been developing it, obviously it could go a lot of different ways, and I think, like if I gain some modicum of success and can have, buy some land to build a nice shop and things like that, then you could have a farm, or gardens or whatever. You could have craft stuff, pottery, and all these things, and people could do that. But I think also there is kind of I remember like when I had my first job, I was like 14. I started working it. I remember like the hardest day of work of my life. I was 14 and I was with this other kid who was 15, and we unloaded an entire tractor trailer of bales of hay and straw. And that was the hardest day of work of my life. And I was 14 years old, and that I was able to do it. It was really hard. You'd have to pay me a lot more. I got paid $5.35 an hour to do that, but like, that's even just the thing of like, because I've had guys come and start our company, and some of them it's like they see, oh, like I didn't go to college, but now I have this opportunity. This is great. I can make a career, and they're doing awesome. And some guys that are like, oh, this is hard, and they show up like 2 days a week, and then they quit after a month. And it's just that you need that experience of like doing something hard and realizing like you can push yourself to the limit, and just even like in that physical work is a necessary and unknown skill amongst young people today. Because certainly you could do something like that and then decide like, I don't want to do that. But then even within the trades, there's still people who run the businesses and people who do the finances and people who make the sales and all that stuff. So you don't have to be, that's what everybody starts doing when their knees get worn out. So.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, I like that idea of combining or bringing back the participation, right? So your education isn't strictly propositional, or it isn't strictly procedural, right? It isn't strictly, oh, I'm going to look at this like a carpenter would, right? It's also all about this idea of actually physically making something happen. I mean, one of the strengths, in my opinion, of Jordan Peterson that people really don't give enough credit to, because he's such a pragmatist, clean your room. Like physically do things in the world just so that you can learn you have agency again. Because a lot of people just act like they have no agency. So one of the videos that's being edited right now while I'm doing nothing, because I'm able to have a nice person volunteer his video editing skills, is on capitalism, where a lot of people just blame capitalism for their failure. And they're like, well, it's capitalism's fault that I don't have more money. It's like, well, no, capitalism's the thing that allows anybody to have money equally. Right? Like it gives you equal access to capital. That's what it does. Like, so what it really does is shine on your failure. Like, because if you don't have money in the capitalist system, it's hard to blame other conditions, which is not to say there are no other conditions to blame and they don't have influences, but it's not the capitalism holding you back, because capitalism is literally the freedom to earn, right? That's really what it is. It's the freedom to earn and the equal treatment of people, but people treat it as though it's something shackling them, when in fact what's shackling them is their inaction. It's like, well, I can't get a raise at work. Have you asked for one? Because a lot of people can just ask for one and get one, especially if they really are good workers. And like, I never, come in and listen to people and go, oh, that's because he doesn't work hard, but occasionally I ask them, well, do you think Elon Musk earned his money? And they're like, no, probably not. Like he had all these things. And I'm like, do you sleep under your desk at work? Have you ever done that? It's like, well, but Elon Musk did. So maybe doing that would, would get you closer to where he's at. And they don't have a sense for that because they're stuck in this propositional hell, roughly speaking, where everything's happening up here. And then they're coming up with these, well, I'm an anarcho-capitalist. It's like, no, you're not. Like, just stop. These are not real things you can be, right? But what you can do is participate in the world and find out what you can be in the world. And that's the strength of Peterson, is he says, no. You may be lost. You may not know. You may have no meaning, right? You may have no map of meaning, but you can explore the territory by actually going and cleaning your room. And all of a sudden you can start to create that meaning, right? You can start to interface with things. You can start to take control of your life back, right? And the only thing that's been holding you back is your inaction because you're afraid of things, or you imagine that you're being shackled by ghosts and by creatures that aren't there, roughly speaking.
Yeah, I mean, I keep thinking over and over about the parable where Jesus talks about, the three guys, and he gives one guy 5 coins, and he gives one guy 2 coins, he gives one guy 1, and the guy with 5 makes 5 more, and the guy with 2 makes 2 more, and the guy with the 1 is like, well, I hid it because I was afraid, and I knew you were coming back. And that's the thing, is everybody's like looking at the person who got the better hand in life or whatever, and saying, because I didn't get that, like, well, yeah, you didn't get that, but you have something, and do something with your something. And then even if he, it's like, we only, I was thinking about, like, we only hear the one outcome of the master was really upset that he just hid it in a handkerchief or whatever. So it's like, if he had invested it and got nothing, would the master have been mad? Probably not, because he would have said, you learned a valuable lesson about what kind of an investment, not an investment not to make, or whatever. You tried, and, stuff doesn't always work out that way. But it's that thing of, it's this denial of our own responsibility.
Agency.
Pretending,
it's our own agency.
Yeah. Or pretending like we didn't know that we do have the ability to do something. So
yeah, exactly. And when we have these systems of, the world's ruled by politics, and therefore that's why I can't succeed because I don't have political connections, or whatever nonsense they gin up in their head that obviously isn't true, they don't try. And so they're destroying their own agency for no reason. And then there's people with plenty of personal agency, but again, they can't cooperate because they're, they don't even understand what they want. Joey made a comment about that earlier with one person in particular, and a lot of people are like that. They don't know what they really want, right? And then so they're not taking advantage of the small steps, of the tiny bites of the elephant, because you eat an elephant one bite at a time, and they're sort of expecting, no, I mean, I'm just going to be Elon Musk tomorrow, as though that could ever be an option in the world. Like, no, that's not how it works. Before you learn to manage $1 million a year salary, you learn to manage $100,000 a year salary and everything in between, because otherwise you'll just screw it up anyway. And you don't know that. Like, you think that you're a rational actor and you're going to be rational and everything's going to work out perfectly, but that's not the way things go. And that's one of the things I like about the meditation I mentioned earlier was, the real advantage to sitting meditation or prayer or any type of contemplative practice, even, although I prefer the meditative practices for this, is that you can really get a sense for what's going on in your head. And it's a lot more than you realize. And you're like, oh, there's all this stuff going on in my head that I wasn't paying attention to, that I wasn't aware of, that I'm not able to integrate, right? And then it can take a couple of years or, a decade or more to integrate some of that stuff. But at least being aware that you're not always ruled by some magical rationality, and that often you're just responding emotionally to things, is really important, because then you get the sense that, well, maybe I shouldn't trust my own ideas. Right? That's why we talk ideas out with people, right? And maybe I shouldn't trust my own implementation of my ideas by myself. Like maybe I should have somebody look at my source code, right, before I run it, right? Maybe I should have somebody vet my design before I go and try to instantiate it, right? Maybe I should get advice from somebody else, right, and perspective from somebody else before I go putting effort into this thing. And I think it's really important. Like we need feedback. Feedback is good, and we can give ourselves self-feedback, and we should. And we can be self-critical, and boy, should we do that. Most people aren't even self-critical, but there's still a value in having an outsider talk about your ideas. And especially when, you take someone like Joey, for example. Joey is so excellent in taking your idea and just spitting it back at you using completely different language and framing. It's so useful. Like it's invaluable. And there are precious few people that can do that, but there are people that can do that for whatever thing you need. And you probably know them or could know them with one or two handshakes. And we don't even seek that out anymore. We're so stuck in our heads. We're like, why not do this and I not do that? People should come to me and cooperate with me in the way that I expect, even when we don't know what that way is, right? And people come in and say, I'd like to help. And they're like, well, yeah, they don't know what they want. And they didn't know that before. They thought that they knew what they wanted, but they didn't.
Yeah, it's interesting the way that, like, you need that perspective of time with these things. I was actually listening to somebody today, and they were talking about like kids whose parents get divorced and stuff like that, or some kind of a weird situation. And, they leave the house when they're 18, and most of them can't actually like talk about that experience until they're 28. It takes 10 years of separation from that environment to be able to say like what was wrong with it, or to really frame it accurately. And that's just the background processing of your brain or whatever, but we don't consider that. So I mean that's even probably something just to like some folks having a meaning crisis. You just they just need to like keep living life longer, maybe.
Well, they need to do things. I mean, meaning crisis, I would say the easiest way to understand the meaning crisis is to say it is a crisis of lack of proper participation in the world. And not just in the world. So I've got a video on 3 frames, right? It's participation of you with yourself, with your inner self. Like, what the hell's going on in my head anyway? I don't know. I got these monkeys in my head, right? And they're shouting at me sometimes, right? Proper participation with nature, and then proper participation with others. And those are the 3 frames. And I did a nice video with Catherine Wilson, who ran the Thunder Bay conference. Mm-hmm. And we talked about the intimacy crisis. And I go over some of that there too on my channel. And I think it's, understanding these things is actually really important, because it gives us a better sense for what we need to do to participate together better. Because everybody says, again, they want to participate, but nobody wants to lead. That already causes a problem, right? And then nobody wants to be led, and that causes a different set of problems. But and this goes back to hospitality, right? Which I hear service, right? But service is a submission, and it's really the submission that you need to go through. And what we really have is a submission crisis, right? Because if we're not willing to submit, we can't make intimate connections. And if we can't make intimate connections, we can't cooperate. And if we can't cooperate, any meaning that we create is only ours, and it only lasts as long as we do. And as long as we can maintain it, worse yet. So it doesn't even last as long as we do for the most part. That's a big problem for people, because they see that unconsciously long before they're able to articulate it, to your point about the 10 years, right? You sense these things in your brain a long time before you can put them in propositions, because we don't think in propositions. We think in this unconscious sort of way, and our thoughts bubble up. And sometimes they manifest in our body, right, as pain or soreness or illness or whatever. And sometimes they just sit there and brew, and they cause angry outbursts, right? They cause weird reactions to things, and we never knew why, right? And it's not until we, and this is, a plug for therapy, even though I find psychology in general despicable. This is why therapy works, right? And helps, and it can help. And, people, If you want to try something, try therapy. It might help you. I mean, first go to your friends for therapy, but like if you got to buy a therapist, go right ahead, right? It might work. And that's the problem. We don't have any reflection and we lose that sense. We get further and further on ourselves. We can't cooperate with anybody. We can't even reflect on our own thoughts with people because we don't trust them, because we've been hurt in the past, or people are inherently unreliable, or they're incapable because some people can't, right? Like people are not equal, right? There's all these problems, but we've got to get out there and start trying to interact and trying to participate more, because that's the key to creating a more lasting, deeper meaning for ourselves. It's part of the meaning crisis for sure.
Yeah. I leading also is one of those things people just have to learn to try and fail. I've been reluctantly dragged into the necessity of having to lead, but at least, but then you're just at the point of, as soon as you cross that barrier, then you just find out, oh, all the leaders don't know what they're doing either. So it's just, everybody's just figuring it out as they go along. That's just,
nobody knows what they're doing. That's true. But look, it's right in the book. You got to have a head. Right. You got to have a head. You got to have a body. Power gets expressed upward. Authority informs downward. I mean, it's clear as day. Clear as day.
Yeah.
And that's why leadership's important. And if nobody's going to take leadership, then it's going to be hard to build things. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's almost completely impossible. And sometimes people get lucky. But and there's Joey with another good point. Yeah, people also have to be able to follow. Like you have to be able to follow. Because if you're not willing to follow, and all you're going to do is complain about the leadership and not participate, which is not the same as critique. Like critique is different from complaint. And I'm not saying don't ever complain about anything either, right? Because complaints can be useful. But if that's all you're doing, it's a problem. If all you're doing is complaining and or critiquing, that's a problem. You need that celebration. You need that acknowledgement, right? The leader needs that too. And you need, as a leader, you need your sense in the hierarchy, right? Are you actually the top lobster, or is somebody else the top lobster? And do you know what you're doing? I mean, I didn't finish it, but I've been watching the Sevilla King, Grim Grizz PVK video. And I'm already at the point where it's become abundantly clear to me that they don't actually understand why people are in this little corner of the internet. Not that they don't have good ideas, right? But I just don't think they understand it. I think I have a better idea of why people are in this little corner of the internet than what's been expressed so far. And I haven't finished the talk, so maybe it'll get more clear as time goes on. But I mean, do you know what you're doing when you're under the top lobster, Peterson? Right? When you're in this meaning thing, because it's still like his first book, it still maps a meaning, right? He's still talking about meaning. Vervaeke may do it differently, or maybe even better in some ways, and I would say worse than others, right? But does everybody else know what they're doing? Do you know where you are in the hierarchy? Because I'm not sure that they do, right? From what I've heard so far, I'm not sure. I'm not sure they know.
Yeah. Well, I think the impetus behind my idea is, it's probably, I think it kind of ultimately has to come from some sort of spiritual thing, because the goal is not really necessarily, the goal is to build the people, and then for the people to be people who make better people. It's difficult to measure that success. And I've even writing and thinking about it, it's like, maybe contentedness is a valuable thing that's extremely hard to quantify in like monetary terms, but like if you can learn how to be content, then you've drastically reduced your need to earn more, because you are content with less. And Yeah, that's what I'm in it for. People are the most valuable thing we have, and especially because I have 2 daughters and another one on the way. So the crisis of young men is very prescient, important in my mind. Is like this is something that needs to be taken care of. So, but I've always had that a heart for young guys and the next generation. So.
No, that's good. It's a good mission, and I think John Vervaeke talks a lot about this. I think you'd have a lot of agreement with him on this. He says we don't necessarily need to make everybody wiser, but we need more wise men.
Yeah,
exemplifying wisdom in the world, and that sort of sounds a lot like what you're talking about. And so, like I agree. I think that's super important, and I like your outline. Is incomplete as it may have been, which is fine. But I think you're on the right track, and I think you should do it, and I think it'll work. Yeah. And I think it's wonderful, and just teaching people how to be persons instead of individuals, because you can't be an individual. It's ridiculous. Go live in the woods. There's no internet or electricity for you. You're not an individual. You're a person, and you're connected to other persons. And we're too far away from one another, right? Because I can call somebody and get my heater fixed, right? I call somebody, my electricity goes bad, right?
Well, I think this is close enough to the goal of 3 hours. I can say I'm ready to sleep. I've been up since 4:30. So. Oh
my goodness, Michael. Well, yeah. Look, I'm glad you're doing this, and I appreciate being given the opportunity to participate. So thank you.
Yeah, well, it was good to talk to you. So. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you. You too, sir. Good luck with your mission there.
Thank you.